Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the gritty reality of being a medieval stone mason, where the truth is that fashioning cathedrals was more about splinters and sweat than glory and grandeur. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. You wake up to the sound of a rooster crowing, not because of some quaint pastoral scene, but because you're about to spend another day chiseling massive hunks of stone. Welcome to your life as a medieval stone mason in the 14th century. Forget any romantic notions of artistic creativity or leisurely craftwork. This is a grind, literally. Your day starts early, with the sun barely kissing the horizon, and you're already on your feet, ready, or maybe resigned is a better word, for another round of backbreaking labor. Now, let's talk about your initiation into this world of stone and sweat, because you didn't just walk into this job at a mature age, armed with a hefty resume. Nope, you started out as an apprentice, usually around the tender age of 12. While today that age might scream middle school science fairs and video games, for you, it meant a crash course in how to survive in a world where your hands would become your primary tools. And believe me, it wasn't a choice made out of passion. The decision was often made by your family, driven by the hard economic realities of medieval life. Apprenticeship wasn't just about learning skills, it was about survival. Your family probably paid handsomely for you to be taken under the wing of a master mason, a sum that could equal several months' wages. The stakes were high, and there was no turning back once you were in. You'd live with your master, eat with them, and work for them, all while learning the tricks of the trade. At the same time, you'd be reminded constantly that you were very much at the bottom of the social ladder, and the ladder was made of stone. As an apprentice, your day would begin by fetching water or carrying tools. Sounds easy, right? Just wait. These tools are not the sleek, ergonomic ones you see today. Try rudimentary chisels and mallets, which were essentially blunt instruments capable of inflicting as much pain on you as they did on the stone. You'd learn to use these to shape stones that would one day become part of a cathedral or castle. Romantic, except for the fact that each stone could weigh up to several hundred pounds, and your job was to smooth its edges in a time long before forklifts and health and safety regulations. Speaking of regulations, or the lack thereof, let's address your work attire. Forget any thoughts of steel-toed boots or hard hats. You're in sandals, my friend. Yes, the kind that leaves your toes exposed to the whims of gravity and heavy stone. If you're lucky, you'll have a leather apron to shield yourself from the more aggressive chunks of debris, but it's not exactly OSHA compliant. And goggles, that's cute. Your only defense against flying stone chips is a good blink reflex and a prayer. The work itself is as monotonous as it is dangerous. You're chipping away at stone for hours on end, enveloped in a cloud of dust that seems intent on invading your lungs. Stone dust is not just a nuisance, it's a health hazard. No one told you that inhaling this stuff day in and day out could lead to respiratory issues. But hey, you're not here for a long time. You're here for a good time, right? Let's pause to acknowledge the allure of being part of something bigger. Sure, you're likely working on a grand cathedral that'll stand for centuries, a testament to human ingenuity and divine inspiration. But there's a catch. You'll never get credit for your work. Your contribution becomes part of the anonymous collective effort, swallowed by the grandeur of the finished product. It's a bit like being the drummer in a famous band, minus the fame. All this hard work for what? Well, if you survive the apprenticeship, which could last anywhere from 7 to 10 years, you might eventually become a journeyman, which essentially means you've graduated to doing the same backbreaking work, but with a slightly better paycheck. Then, if the stars align and fate favors you, you could become a master mason, a position that offers a bit more autonomy and respect. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, you're just a kid with a chisel, trying to make your mark on a stone that'll outlast you by centuries. While you toil, you might hear stories of the great masons who came before you, like William of Sense, the architect of Canterbury Cathedral, who managed to survive a fall from a scaffold. Spoiler, he didn't entirely survive it. He was severely injured and had to return to France. These tales serve as cautionary tales rather than inspiration, reminding you of the thin line between life and death in this line of work. So, next time you hear someone waxing poetic about the artisans of yore, remember, you're living the gritty truth of it. There's beauty in the craft, no doubt, but it's a beauty carved by calloused hands, sweating in the sun, surrounded by the ever-present danger of falling stones and collapsing scaffolds. If you make it through the day with all your limbs intact, you count yourself lucky. Living history is no romantic walk in the park. It's a marathon of endurance, sculpted in stone. But let's not get too poetic about the daily grind of a medieval stone mason, especially when your wallet is as empty as a monk's wine cellar during Lent. Sure, you're part of a grandiose project, but in 14th century Europe, being a mason meant living on a financial knife's edge. Despite constructing the architectural wonders of their time, masons were paid wages that barely kept them above the poverty line. Imagine this. You're part of the crew building the narrated, but your wage is so pitiful it couldn't buy you a front row seat to your own masterpiece if they ever charged admission. We're talking about earning just a few pence a day, and by few, I mean somewhere between 2 to 4 pence, depending on your skill level and the region. To put this in context, a skilled mason might earn about 4 pence daily, while an unskilled laborer would earn less. Now, considering that a decent loaf of bread could set you back about a penny, and meat was a luxury reserved for Sundays, if you were lucky, it's clear your diet was more about survival than savoring. It's like being a gourmet chef who can only afford instant noodles. And here's a fun fact to chew on. Inflation wasn't just a modern headache. In the 14th century, England experienced a severe economic shake-up due to the aftermath of the Black Death, which wiped out about a third of the population. Labor became scarce, and the demand for masons shot up faster than a catapulted stone, but so did prices. Bread, ale, and meat could cost twice as much as they did before the plague. While wages did increase slightly post-plague, they never quite kept pace with the rising cost of living. So there you are, crafting stone arches and vaults that defy gravity, while your financial situation is stuck in the Middle Ages. Now, let's talk about the guild system, because if you think it was all about camaraderie and shared wisdom, you're in for a rude awakening. Guilds were the medieval equivalent of an exclusive club, and they didn't hand out membership cards lightly. They were more about maintaining control and hierarchy than fostering brotherhood. Think of them as the original gatekeepers, ensuring that only those who paid their dues, literally and figuratively, could move up the ranks. As a journeyman, you'd still be subjected to the whims of the guild. Want to become a master mason? Better be ready to prove your worth with a masterpiece, literally. This final project, often called a masterpiece, was your ticket to the top. But it wasn't a guaranteed golden pass. The guilds held the power to accept or deny you based on criteria that could be as arbitrary as a medieval king's decree. The guild's approval, or lack thereof, could make or break your career, dictating whether you'd ascend to master status or remain in journeyman limbo. And let's not forget the dues. Guild membership wasn't free. It cost you a pretty penny, which you didn't have many of to start with. These dues were supposed to fund guild activities and support its members in times of need, but you can bet that a chunk of it went to line the pockets of those at the top. It's like paying for insurance that only kicks in when you've already lost everything. Hierarchies were rigid, and competition was fierce. The guilds controlled the flow of work and made sure only approved members could take on significant projects. They were like the medieval version of today's professional licensing boards, but with more robes and fewer regulations. The guilds enforced quality and uniformity, ensuring that a mason from York could seamlessly work on a project in London. This ensured that standards were maintained, but it also stifled innovation and locked out potential new entrants who might disrupt the status quo. So, while the romantic notion of a guild as a supportive brotherhood might make for great storytelling, the reality was more of a cutthroat business network. Your fellow masons might be your competition more than your comrades, each vying for the precious few contracts that could ensure their survival and maybe, just maybe, a step up the social ladder. In this world where the stones you shaped would last longer than the roofs over your head, the economic pressure was relentless. Masons were indispensable yet undervalued, the unsung heroes of medieval construction. Your work laid the literal foundation for the future, but your personal future was as uncertain as the weather. A fitting metaphor considering the medieval climate was no picnic either, with the Little Ice Age bringing colder temperatures and shorter growing seasons. So, dear Mason, as you chip away at the stones that will outlive you by centuries, remember that the grand cathedrals and castles you're building might be timeless monuments to human achievement, but the life you're living is a testament to the relentless grind of survival. The stones may be silent, but they carry the echoes of your toil, a whisper of the countless hands that carved them into history, one chisel hit at a time. The economic reality of your time was as solid as the stones you shaped, unforgiving and hard to crack. Yet, there was a certain pride in knowing that your work would stand the test of time, even if your wages barely stood up to the inflation of your day. In the end, you weren't just building buildings. You were building history, one stone at a time, even if that history forgot your name. And that, my friend, is the bittersweet legacy of the medieval mason. And as if dealing with the hard-as-nails economic reality wasn't enough, let's dive into the tangled web of social and political factors that made your life as a medieval stonemason as predictable as a game of royal charades. In the medieval world, power was the ultimate currency, and if you thought you were simply a craftsman, think again. You're more like a pawn on a chessboard, moved around at the whim of kings, bishops, and wealthy patrons who saw stone masonry as a means to their own glorious ends. Picture this. You're halfway through carving a gargoyle, each chisel stroke bringing the stone beast to life, when word comes that the noble funding your cathedral has fallen out of favor. Suddenly, you're not just out of work, you're out of luck. The whims of the aristocracy could upend your life faster than a medieval jousting match. A royal falling out, a scandal at court, any of these could see your project ruthlessly axed, leaving you scrambling to find another gig before your bread and cheese diet turns into just bread. But hold on, the church wasn't exactly a walk in the cloisters either. For Masons, the church was both a blessing and a curse, more like a capricious deity than a steady employer. Sure, they commissioned cathedrals that kept you chiseling away for years, but they could also pull the plug faster than a monk at a wine tasting. A new bishop might decide that your ambitious flying buttresses were too ostentatious and not in line with their vision of divine modesty. You'd be left standing there, wondering how to explain to your family that your paycheck just evaporated into thin air, along with the bishop's enthusiasm. And let's not forget the power struggles within the church itself. A change in papal leadership could mean a shift in religious priorities, suddenly making your architectural masterpiece the ecclesiastical equivalent of last year's fashion. Imagine being told that the elaborate stonework you've been sweating over is now considered too pagan, or, heaven forbid, too French. You'd have to pivot faster than a medieval minstrel at a silent retreat. The rich patrons and the church weren't just your bosses. They were your life's overlords, wielding influence over every aspect of your work. And when they decided to cut costs, it was the masons who felt the pinch. The patron's budget was like a medieval roulette wheel, and you were betting your livelihood on which way it would spin. One day you're carving angels, the next you're carving out a living in the dirt, hoping another project comes along before your tools rust from disuse. Then there's the political landscape, a chaotic tapestry of alliances and betrayals, where wars could break out over a slight, as trivial as a misplaced comma in a treaty. In times of conflict, royal funds were diverted from construction to conquest. Your cathedral dreams could be shelved indefinitely as castles and fortifications took precedence. A king might decide he needs another fortress to secure his borders, and suddenly your carefully laid plans are nothing but dust in the wind. As a stonemason, you were caught in a perpetual balancing act, juggling the demands of patrons who wanted grandeur on a shoestring budget, and a church that could change its mind like the tides. Your role was less of a creator and more of a survivor, navigating the treacherous waters of medieval politics with nothing but a chisel and a prayer. It was a high-stakes game where the only certainty was uncertainty. And if you thought those challenges were enough, add the guilds into the mix. These organizations were supposed to protect your interests, but they were often as unpredictable as the patrons themselves. Guilds set the rules, but they could also bend them at will, often favoring those with the most influence or the deepest pockets. They were like a medieval insurance policy, essential, but not always reliable when you needed them most. In short, Being a medieval stonemason was less about building edifices and more about enduring edifices of power. You played your part in the grand design, but the true architects were the ones who held the purse strings and ecclesiastical power. And while the cathedrals and castles you built might stand the test of time, your place in history was as fleeting as the whims of those who commissioned them. So, as you chip away at yet another block of stone, remember that the world outside your workshop is as hard and unyielding as the granite in your hands. The social and political forces that shaped your life were as unpredictable as the medieval weather, and navigating them required a mix of skill, luck, and a healthy dose of resilience. You, my friend, are not just a craftsman. You're a survivor in a world where the only constant is change, and the only certainty is uncertainty. The stones may be silent, but the echoes of power and politics reverberate in every chisel mark, telling a story as enduring as the structures you build. So, let's get real about the so-called artistic freedom of medieval masons. If you think these guys were the rock star Picassos of their time, wielding chisels like paintbrushes, think again. In reality, medieval masons were more like the human version of 3D printers, executing the vision of someone else's blueprint. That's right. Before you could even dream of carving a whimsical dragon or adding a personal touch to that Gothic spire, you had to stick to the script laid out by the architects and patrons. And trust me, these scripts were about as flexible as a knight's armor. Let's start by debunking this idea of creative liberty. Medieval masons followed the designs laid out by the master builders and architects, who were often under strict instructions from patrons, the real puppet masters of the medieval architecture world. These patrons, whether they were kings, bishops, or wealthy merchants, had clear ideas about what they wanted, and those ideas definitely didn't include your artistic flair. Your job was to deliver their vision with military precision, not to channel your inner Michelangelo. The plans for these grand cathedrals and castles were often drawn up in meticulous detail, like a medieval IKEA manual, minus the amusing stick figures. The masons had to follow these plans to a T, ensuring everything from the scale of the arches to the placement of decorative elements was just right. Deviating from the plan wasn't just discouraged, it was unthinkable. Imagine being halfway through carving a statue of St. George, only to realize you'd added your own twist to his facial expression. That kind of creativity could land you in hot water faster than a witch in a ducking stool. The rigid designs imposed by the architects meant that masons worked within a framework that allowed little room for improvisation. Think of it like baking a cake from a boxed mix. You could add a sprinkle of creativity here and there, but stray too far, and you'd risk ending up with a mess rather than a masterpiece. These masons were skilled craftsmen, no doubt, but their skill lay in precision and execution, not in personal interpretation. And let's talk about the romanticized view of Gothic cathedrals. Sure, we look at these towering marvels today and see them as testaments to human creativity and divine inspiration. But for the masons toiling away under the weight of these structures, the reality was more about repetitive strain injuries than artistic fulfillment. Picture yourself chipping away at the same repetitive pattern for days on end, with the only change being the sore muscles you discover along the way. The physical toll of the work was brutal. Imagine spending your days hunched over a block of stone, wielding a mallet and chisel for hours on end. You'd end up with biceps that could make a modern-day gym-goer envious, but you'd also have the back pain to match. The repetitive nature of the work meant that injuries were common, particularly in the hands and wrists, early signs of what we now call repetitive strain injury. And don't even get started on the lung issues from inhaling stone dust, a medieval mason's equivalent of a smoker's cough. The appeal of working on something as grand as a cathedral was undeniable. These structures were the skyscrapers of the medieval world, the ultimate status symbol for towns and cities. Building one was a chance to be part of something bigger than yourself, to contribute to a legacy that would stand for centuries. But let's not kid ourselves into thinking it was a labor of love. It was a labor, pure and simple, driven by the need to survive and earn a living. The reality was that masons were part of a highly organized but strictly hierarchical system. They were part of a team of workers, each with their specific role, from the stone cutters responsible for shaping blocks to the setters who placed them in position. Everyone had their place, and stepping out of line was not an option. It was like being part of a medieval assembly line, where deviation was a dirty word, and efficiency was king. And let's not overlook the economic and social pressures that came with the job. As we've touched on before, the pay was far from princely. Masons had to contend with low wages, high costs of living, and the constant threat of unemployment if a project was halted or a patron lost interest. It was a precarious existence, where the stones you shaped would outlast any financial security you might hope to achieve. Furthermore, the guild system, while offering some degree of protection and community, also added another layer of control and conformity. The guilds dictated the standards and practices of the trade, ensuring that work was uniform and consistent. But this consistency came at the cost of creativity. The guilds were there to maintain the status quo, not to foster innovation or encourage artistic expression. So, the next time you gaze up at a Gothic cathedral and marvel at its beauty, spare a thought for the masons who worked tirelessly to bring it to life. These structures, with their soaring arches and intricate details, are a testament to human skill and perseverance, but not necessarily to creative freedom. The masons who built them were skilled laborers, yes, but they were also cogs in a much larger machine, their work dictated by forces beyond their control. In the end, the myth of the medieval mason as a free-spirited artist is just that, a myth. The reality was far more grounded, as solid as the stones they carved. It was a life of hard work, strict adherence to plans, and little room for personal expression. Yet, despite these constraints, the masons' legacy endures in the enduring beauty and grandeur of the structures they built, a testament to their skill and dedication, even if their individual names have been lost to history. And while their stories might be silent, the stones speak volumes, a reminder of a time when art was not just an expression but a craft, one that required as much grit and determination as it did talent. The masons might not have been the freewheeling artists of legend, but they were something much more practical, builders of history, one chisel stroke at a time. Yet, despite all we've learned about your trials and tribulations, as a medieval stonemason, there's still an undeniable allure to the structures you left behind. These towering cathedrals and castles, with their buttresses kissing the sky and their stone gargoyles grimacing down at passers-by, have managed to overshadow the gritty details of your daily grind. Why is that, you ask? Thank good old human nature and our penchant for romanticizing the past. After all, who wants to hear about the aches and pains of medieval masonry when they can get lost in the stained glass glory of Notre Dame or the soaring heights of Chartres? Let's face it, the romantic allure of these buildings is a testament to their sheer audacity. Built in a time when engineering was more trial and error than tried and true, these structures defy logic and gravity in equal measure. They stand as a monument to human perseverance, even if that perseverance was often driven by the fear of being out of work, or dare we say, the wrath of a particularly fussy patron. It's easy to get swept up in the majesty of these stone giants, forgetting that each block was laid by hands that ached at the end of a long day. Think of it this way. The cathedrals and castles were the social media influencers of their time, carefully curated to project power and prosperity for the kings, bishops, and merchants who commissioned them. Your toil and trouble were airbrushed out of the picture, leaving only the grandeur for posterity to admire. It's a bit like looking at a picture-perfect Instagram post without glimpsing the chaos that went into creating it. The final product is all we see, leaving the sweat and sacrifice in the shadows. Now, let's bring this back to the present day. If you think the hierarchical, precarious life of a medieval mason is a relic of the past, I've got a bridge, or perhaps a cathedral, to sell you. Modern labor markets aren't so different. We've swapped chisels for keyboards and cathedrals for skyscrapers, but the basic dynamics remain. We still have our patrons, now in the form of corporate overlords, and our guilds have evolved into professional networks and licensing boards. And let's not forget our own version of masterpieces, the projects and presentations that make or break careers. Take a look at the gig economy, where job security is as fleeting as a medieval mason's lunch break. Freelancers today might not be carving stone, but they're still beholden to the whims of clients who demand the world for a pittance, echoing the long-forgotten patrons who wanted cathedrals on a shoestring budget. The tools have changed, but the game remains the same. It's a reminder that while technology evolves, human nature is a bit more stubborn. And let's not overlook inflation. that age-old spectre that haunted your medieval wallet and continues to make modern-day paychecks feel like sand slipping through our fingers. The Black Death might have triggered economic upheavals in your time, but today we've got our own plagues, whether they're viral or financial, that keep us on our toes. Prices rise, wages stagnate, and the more things change, the more they stay the same. So, what do we take away from your life as a medieval mason, and why does it matter? Well, for starters, it's a reminder that history isn't just about kings and battles. It's about the people who built the world, one stone at a time. Your legacy is etched in stone, quite literally, and while your name might be lost to time, your work speaks volumes. In a world obsessed with fame and recognition, there's something profoundly humbling about knowing that your contribution endures, even if your name doesn't. Sure, the romanticized vision of the past can be alluring, but it's the gritty, unvarnished reality that offers the most valuable lessons. It's easy to get caught up in the aesthetics of history, but it's the sweat and toil that tell the real story. The past isn't just a tapestry of grand achievements. It's a mosaic of individual efforts, each piece adding to the larger picture. In the end, the story of the medieval mason is one of resilience, a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure and create, even in the face of adversity. It's a reminder that while the world has changed, the fundamental challenges of making a living and leaving a legacy remain. So, next time you admire a cathedral or marvel at a castle's grandeur, take a moment to think of the nameless masons who transformed raw stone into enduring beauty. They remind us that even the most monumental achievements are built one chisel stroke at a time. And with that, my friend, we've traveled through time, from the dusty workshops of medieval Europe to the skyscraping offices of today. We've chipped away at the myths, revealing the harsh realities beneath. We've seen how the past echoes in the present, and how those echoes shape our understanding of history. So, as you lay your head down tonight, remember, the stones may be silent, but they have stories to tell, and it's up to us to listen. In 1485, in the small town of Medellin, Spain, more renowned for its olives than for its future conquistadors, a baby named Hernán Cortés made his dramatic entrance into the world. It's fair to say that his ambitions were bigger than the town itself, which wasn't hard given that Medellin's population could fit snugly into a modern football stadium with room to spare. Cortés was born into a family of minor nobility, basically the medieval equivalent of having a blue checkmark on social media. His father, Martin Cortés de Monroy, had all the aspirations of a highborn gentleman, but was short on the cash to match. So, young Hernán was expected to do what any self-respecting, slightly broke noble offspring would do: get educated, go to university, and hope to stumble upon a lucrative career, preferably one that didn't involve actual stumbling. Now, when it came to schooling, Cortés was sent to the University of Salamanca at the ripe old age of 14. This was a time when most teenagers today are still figuring out how to parallel park. But Hernán wasn't exactly the model student. The legal studies he was supposed to be absorbing like a sponge were more like water off a duck's back. He was less interested in the weighty tomes of law and more inclined towards tales of chivalric adventure and the kind of stories that would later fuel his own over-the-top exploits. To be fair, the University of Salamanca was one of the most prestigious institutions in the country, and it was bursting with young minds eager to make something of themselves, ideally without working too hard. But Cortés had a restless spirit, a bit like the medieval version of a college dropout with a dream. And boy, did he drop out. In a move that would make any helicopter parent spiral, Cortés left Salamanca without a degree, ready to chase dreams that were more elusive than his professor's approval. The end of the 15th century in Spain was a time of big dreams and even bigger risks. Columbus had already done his thing in 1492, convincing everyone that sailing across the ocean to discover new lands was the coolest career move ever. The New World beckoned like a shiny, exotic adventure playground for those with the guts and the gumption to get there. And Cortés, ever the opportunist, was not about to miss out. But before we get into the vastness of the Atlantic and the whole conquering the Aztecs business, let's not gloss over the economic and social context of the time. Spain in the 16th century was a land of stark contrasts. The Reconquista had just wrapped up, which meant the Catholics were riding high, and the nobles were flush with newfound lands. Meanwhile, the average farmer was likely more concerned with whether this year's crop would mean a feast or famine. Plus, Spain was itching to make its mark on the world stage. The age of exploration wasn't just about discovering new lands. It was about bringing back spices, gold, and tales of glory. Basically, the original influencer lifestyle. Hernán Cortés, with his minor noble status and major ambitions, wanted his piece of the pie, or at least a decent slice of the gold-encrusted cake. So in 1504, at the age of 19, Cortés set sail for Hispaniola, the island that today is divided between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Back then, it was the gateway to the New World, where the Spanish were busy figuring out how to make a buck, or rather, a peso, off their new territories. The journey across the Atlantic wasn't for the faint-hearted. We're talking months at sea, questionable food supplies, and the kind of seasickness that would make even the hardiest sailor question his life choices. But Hernán was driven, and not just by the wind in his sails. He was driven by the allure of adventure and the promise of fortune. And so, he landed in Santo Domingo, ready to carve out his destiny. It was a bold move, considering that his entire career up to that point had been defined by his ability to avoid work rather than excel at it. In this land of opportunity, Cortés quickly learned the ropes. He wasn't the first Spaniard to arrive with grand plans, but he was one of the few who saw beyond the immediate gains, while others were content to manage plantations or engage in the occasional skirmish with indigenous people. Cortés had his eyes on bigger prizes. He was charming, audacious, and crucially, he had a knack for making the right friends at the right time. Networking, it seems, was a skill that transcended centuries. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Hernán Cortés was still a young man, and while his ambition was boundless, his experience was not. Yet the stage was set. The New World was a place where fortunes could change faster than the tide, and Cortés was nothing if not adaptable. He would soon find himself in positions of power, setting the stage for his legendary, if not infamous, place in history. For now, though, he was just another young Spaniard with dreams as vast as the ocean he had crossed, ready to make his mark on a world that was still figuring out its own borders. And so, Hernán Cortés found himself in the vibrant, bustling environment of Santo Domingo, where the air was thick with the scent of opportunity, and let's be honest, a fair amount of desperation. This was no Spanish metropolis, but a frontier town with all the charm of a Wild West outpost, if the Wild West had been tropical and crawling with conquistadors instead of cowboys. Cortés quickly adapted to the rhythm of colonial life, where the days were as hot as the political ambitions simmering among the Spanish settlers. Hispaniola was the epicenter of Spain's burgeoning empire, though calling it an empire at this stage might have been a tad generous. It was more like a petri dish of colonial experiments, where every Spaniard worth his salt was trying to outdo the next in a mad dash for land, power, and the elusive promise of gold. For Cortés, this meant getting his hands dirty, literally. He started managing a plantation, which was the 16th century equivalent of a corporate internship. The work was grueling and the rewards modest, but it was a necessary step on the ladder of colonial success. And oh, how he climbed. Within a few years, Cortés had amassed enough wealth to make even his penniless noble father back in Spain sit up and take notice. But let's not get carried away. Wealth in this context was more about having a roof over your head and a decent set of clothes, rather than sipping sangria on a private yacht. When he wasn't knee-deep in plantation life, Cortés was learning the art of political maneuvering. This was a world where alliances could make or break a man, and Cortés was nothing if not adaptable. He honed his skills in diplomacy and deceit, much like a reality TV star navigating the treacherous waters of alliances and rivalries. It wasn't long before his ambitions outgrew Hispaniola, and his eyes turned to Cuba, the next big thing in the Spanish colonial craze. In 1511, Cortés joined Diego Velázquez's expedition to conquer Cuba. Now, Velázquez was not just any old conquistador. He was a seasoned operator with a knack for making things happen, and Cortés saw in him both a mentor and a stepping stone. The conquest of Cuba was swift and brutal, as these things tended to be. The indigenous Taino people didn't stand a chance against the superior firepower and ruthless tactics of the Spanish. It's a grim reminder that the romanticized tales of exploration often gloss over the harsh realities of conquest, like how discovering a new world often meant destroying an existing one. Once Cuba was under Spanish control, Velázquez became its governor, a position that came with perks like land, power, and a never-ending queue of sycophants. Cortés, ever the opportunist, quickly ingratiated himself with Velázquez and was rewarded with a sizable encomienda. This was the colonial version of a government grant, where you got land and the labor of the indigenous people who lived on it. It was a sweet deal if you were Spanish, not so much if you were one of those coerced into working the land. With his newfound status, Cortés was living the colonial dream, or nightmare, depending on your perspective, but his rise wasn't without its hiccups. Enter Catalina Suarez, a name that would become synonymous with Cortés's personal drama. Catalina was the sister-in-law of Velázquez's secretary, and her marriage to Cortés was more a political arrangement than a love story. It was like the 16th century version of a celebrity marriage, all pomp, no substance. Cortés and Catalina's marriage was rocky, to say the least. Cortés was more interested in expanding his fortunes than in playing house, and Catalina was not thrilled with being sidelined. Their union was marred by accusations of domestic squabbles and neglect. It's the kind of juicy scandal that would make for a great tabloid headline if only tabloids had existed back then. Despite the marital discord, Cortés continued to climb the social ladder, though not without some bureaucratic wrangling. Politics in colonial times was a cutthroat game, where today's ally could be tomorrow's enemy. Cortés navigated this world with the finesse of a seasoned politician, building alliances and making enemies with equal gusto. And while he was good at it, he was also aware that his fortunes were tied to the whims of men like Velázquez, who could just as easily make or break him. By the late 1510, the Spanish Empire was buzzing with rumors of a rich land to the west, a place filled with gold and glory just waiting to be claimed. It was Mexico, though back then it was more myth than map point, a land of legends that sparked the imaginations of every adventurer worth his salt. Velázquez, ever the power player, wanted a piece of this action. He began organizing expeditions to explore and claim this new world, and Cortés saw his chance to step out of the shadows and into the spotlight. In 1519, Cortés was appointed by Velázquez to lead an expedition to Mexico. It was a decision that would change the course of history, though not in the way Velázquez might have intended. Cortés was given command of 11 ships, carrying about 500 men, a few horses, and a couple of cannons. Hardly an army by modern standards, but enough to make a dent in the unknown. But let's not forget the economic backdrop. Funding an expedition was an expensive business, and while Velázquez provided some backing, Cortés had to put up much of his own money, heavily indebting himself in the process. It was a gamble, a high-stakes game where the potential rewards were as vast as the risks, and Cortés was nothing if not a gambler. As he set sail, tensions simmered between Cortés and Velázquez. The governor began to have second thoughts about giving so much power to an ambitious subordinate. But it was too late. Cortés was already on the high seas, and he had no intention of turning back. He was on a mission to carve his name into history, and nothing, not even the wrath of Velázquez, was going to stop him. Thus began Hernán Cortés's infamous journey to Mexico, a saga that would see him clashing with the mighty Aztec Empire, forging dubious alliances, and rewriting the narrative of conquest in the New World. For now, though, he was just a man on a ship, staring into the horizon, driven by dreams of gold, glory, and the indelible mark he intended to leave on history. Stay tuned. This story is just getting started, and trust me, you won't want to miss the next chapter. Ah, the open seas. The perfect setting for an epic adventure, or at least that's what Hernán Cortés imagined as he set sail in 1519, fueled by dreams of Aztec gold and glory. Picture this: 11 ships, 500 men, 16 horses, and a couple of cannons crammed like sardines in a tin can. If you think your morning commute is rough, try doing it on a wooden ship with questionable sanitation and no Wi-Fi. Cortés and his merry band of conquistadors finally hit the shores of what we now call Mexico. And let me tell you, this wasn't exactly a Club Med vacation. They landed in what is today the state of Veracruz, a coast that was as hot as their ambitions and twice as humid. The date was April 22, 1519, and the conquest clock was officially ticking. But before we dive into the nitty-gritty of imperial smackdown, let's address a popular myth that the Aztecs mistook Cortés for the god Quetzalcoatl. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Many historians have debunked this tale, noting that the Aztecs were well aware these were men looking for wealth, not divine beings. It's a romantic notion, sure, but the reality was far more grounded. Cortés didn't need divine status. He had firepower, cunning, and a penchant for bending the truth. Now, speaking of firepower, you might be wondering how a few hundred men thought they could take on an empire. Well, Cortés was a master of the divide-and-conquer strategy. He played local indigenous groups like a fiddle, forming alliances with tribes who weren't exactly on Team Aztec. The Tlaxcalans, for instance, became crucial allies. They weren't fans of the Aztecs, who had a habit of raiding their villages for sacrificial victims. Nothing says, let's be friends, like a common enemy. Cortés also understood the power of a good PR move. After a brief skirmish with the local Tartanac people, he quickly flipped the script, convincing them to join his cause. It was diplomacy with a side of coercion, a hallmark of Cortés's style. And let's not forget the smallpox epidemic that unwittingly came along for the ride, devastating the indigenous population and doing more damage than Cortés's cannons ever could. It was the ultimate accidental victory, though calling it victory feels like a grim understatement. And then there was the infamous meeting with Montezuma Roman II, the Aztec emperor who had the unenviable task of dealing with these uninvited guests. Montezuma, a man caught between a rock and a hard place, initially tried the diplomatic approach. He sent gifts of gold and precious stones, possibly thinking that lavishing Cortés with wealth might send him packing. Little did he know, this was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Cortés saw the bling and thought, if this is the welcome package, imagine the full buffet. The two finally met in Tenochtitlan, the glittering heart of the Aztec Empire. Picture a city unlike any other, sprawling, sophisticated, and perched atop a lake. It was a metropolis that put European cities to shame with its size and splendor. Montezuma welcomed Cortés as an honored guest, but the Spanish were there for more than sightseeing. Cortés, ever the opportunist, quickly turned Montezuma into a puppet ruler, holding him hostage in his own palace. Talk about a hostile takeover. This wasn't just about brute force, though there was plenty of that. Cortés employed a mix of psychological warfare, diplomacy, and intimidation. He systematically dismantled the Aztec power structure from within, all while claiming he was acting in Montezuma's best interests. It's the kind of Machiavellian maneuvering that would make even a seasoned politician blush. But let's pause for a reality check. Cortés wasn't some invincible hero on a noble quest. He was a man driven by greed and ambition. His actions left a wake of destruction that reshaped entire civilizations. The romanticized image of the conquistador often glosses over the brutal realities of conquest, the violence, the exploitation, and the cultural erasure. It's a reminder that history is written by the victors, but it's lived by everyone. As tensions simmered in Tenochtitlan, the Spanish found themselves in a precarious position. Montezuma's hold over his people weakened, and Cortés was forced to quell a brewing rebellion. The atmosphere was a powder keg, and the fuse was lit when Spanish reinforcements arrived, and Cortés had to leave the city temporarily to deal with their leader, Panfilo de Narvaez. Narvaez had been sent by Velázquez to arrest Cortés, but in a classic Cortés move, he convinced Narvaez's men to join his cause. It was a textbook example of turning lemons into lemonade, or, in this case, soldiers into allies. Back in Tenochtitlan, things were spiraling out of control. The Aztecs were growing restless under Spanish rule, and Montezuma's influence was waning faster than a New Year's resolution. The situation boiled over in what became known as the Nacht Trist, or Sad Night. In June 1520, the Spanish tried to sneak out of the city under the cover of darkness, laden with stolen treasure. But the Aztecs were wise to their plans and ambushed them as they fled. It was a disaster for Cortés, who lost many men and nearly his own life. Ironically, the gold that slowed them down ended up at the bottom of Lake Texcoco. So much for leaving a legacy. Yet, like a phoenix from the ashes, Cortés regrouped. He retreated to Tlaxcala, licking his wounds and plotting his next move. He wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. It took nearly a year, but Cortés returned to Tenochtitlan with a vengeance. He laid siege to the city in the spring of 1521, cutting off supplies and tightening the noose around the Aztec capital. The siege lasted for 3 brutal months, a testament to the Aztecs' resilience and the Spanish thirst for domination. By August 13, 1521, the once mighty Tenochtitlan fell, marking the end of the Aztec Empire and the dawn of Spanish rule in Mexico. The city, a marvel of engineering and culture, was left in ruins. Cortés stood victorious, but at what cost? The conquest of the Aztecs was a turning point in history, setting the stage for centuries of colonial rule and cultural upheaval. But don't close the book just yet. Cortés's story is far from over, and the consequences of his actions would ripple through history in ways he likely never imagined. So stay tuned, because the saga of Hernán Cortés, the man who dared to rewrite the world in his image, is just getting started. So, the curtain may have fallen on Tenochtitlan. Hernán Cortés was still very much center stage, grappling with the aftermath of his Pyrrhic victory. The Aztec capital lay in ruins, yet Cortés's ambitions were far from satisfied. The allure of newfound power was intoxicating, but the reality was more headaches than heroism. Picture a man who's just conquered a kingdom, but finds himself with a to-do list longer than a CVS receipt. First up, Cortés had to figure out how to govern this newly acquired mess. Spoiler, it wasn't all sunshine and gold doubloons. The Spanish crown, eager for a piece of the proverbial pie, was breathing down his neck, demanding their share of the spoils, and more importantly, accountability. Cortés was appointed as the Captain General of New Spain, a title that sounds impressive until you realize it came with all the responsibility and none of the carte blanche he craved. It was like being given the keys to a sports car with a speed limiter. The Spanish crown sent a royal audiencia, essentially a panel of judges with powers to oversee and curb Cortés's authority. It was a classic case of trust, but verify, except with more muskets and less trust. And so began the bureaucratic tug-of-war that would define Cortés's later years. His once unassailable position was now at the mercy of pen pushers and paper shufflers who had never set foot in the New World. Imagine trying to run a marathon with a ball and chain strapped to your leg. Cortés's next move was a foray into Honduras in 1524, a venture that might have looked like a bold new chapter, but was more like a tragicomic footnote. The expedition was ostensibly to quell a rebellion, but let's be honest, it was also a thinly veiled attempt to expand his influence and prove he still had the Midas touch. The journey was a logistical nightmare, spanning over 500 miles of dense jungle and treacherous terrain. If you think your GPS is unreliable, try navigating with only the stars and a questionable map. The Honduras expedition was plagued by hardship, dissent, and disease. Cortés's once loyal men, weary from the relentless pace, began to question his leadership. And who could blame them? The jungle was less El Dorado and more Dante's Inferno, with Cortés as the beleaguered Virgil guiding them through layers of misery. Supplies dwindled, morale plummeted, and the whole endeavor was about as successful as a New Year's resolution in February. Meanwhile, back in Mexico, Cortés's absence was an open invitation for rivals to make their move. His enemies, like vultures circling a carcass, were quick to pounce. His detractors accused him of everything from embezzlement to murder, and soon enough, Cortés was embroiled in a legal morass back in Spain. It was a public relations disaster, the 16th century version of a celebrity scandal splashed across today's tabloids. By the time Cortés returned from his ill-fated jaunt to Honduras, he found his political stock had crashed harder than a Wall Street bubble. The Crown dispatched an inspector, Nuño de Guzman, who didn't exactly roll out the welcome mat. Instead, he seized Cortés's properties and initiated a series of investigations into his conduct. Cortés was on the ropes, fighting a battle on 2 fronts, one against nature and the other against human nature's penchant for envy and intrigue. In a bid to reclaim his tarnished legacy, Cortés made the bold decision to return to Spain in 1528. He hoped to defend his actions before Emperor Charles V and secure his place in history. Picture him as a disgraced CEO heading for a shareholder meeting, armed with charm, charisma, and a stack of hastily prepared notes. But even his legendary silver tongue faced a challenge in the political labyrinth of the Spanish court. Cortés's arrival in Spain was a spectacle, but not the triumphant homecoming he'd envisioned. He was received by Charles V, who, while intrigued by tales of the New World, was also wary of Cortés's growing legend. The emperor acknowledged Cortés's achievements, even granting him the noble title of Marquess of the Valley of Oaxaca. Yet, this was more of a gilded cage than a golden ticket. Cortés was allowed to keep some lands, but was stripped of his governing powers. It was a bittersweet victory, like winning a lifetime supply of chocolate when you're on a diet. Not one to be easily discouraged, Cortés returned to Mexico in 1530, determined to make the most of his reduced circumstances. He relocated to his estate in Cuernavaca, where he dabbled in agriculture and administration, though his heart still yearned for exploration. His restless spirit wouldn't let him settle for a life of quiet retirement and idle wealth. The lure of the unknown kept calling, like a siren song he couldn't resist. In 1535, Cortés embarked on yet another ill-fated expedition, this time to the mysterious lands of California. Spoiler alert, it was less Baywatch and more Castaway. The venture was fraught with the usual litany of challenges: hostile terrain, lack of resources, and the ever-present specter of failure. Cortés, now in his 50s, was no longer the spry conquistador of yore, but a man chasing shadows of past glories. The expedition to California was a financial bust, a reminder that fortune favors not only the bold, but also the lucky. Despite his setbacks, Cortés remained a figure of fascination and controversy. He spent his later years embroiled in legal battles, defending his conquests and trying to secure titles and properties for his children. His once mighty empire had been whittled down to a collection of estates and a reputation as tarnished as silver left out in the rain. He was a legend in his own time, yet a legend with a litany of footnotes. In 1540, Cortés returned to Spain for the final time, his health declining and his fortunes waning. He lived the remainder of his days more as a relic of a bygone era than the dynamic conquistador who had toppled an empire. Cortés died on December 2, 1547, at the age of 62, leaving behind a legacy as complex as the man himself, part hero, part villain, entirely human. The myth of Hernán Cortés, the invincible conqueror, was just that, a myth. His story is a tapestry of triumphs and tragedies, ambition and avarice, a stark reminder that even the mightiest figures are not immune to the inexorable passage of time. His legacy, like the ruins of Tenochtitlan, stands as a testament to the dual nature of history, the romance of discovery and the harsh reality of conquest. But don't pack up just yet. There's more to unravel in the saga of the New World, where the echoes of Cortés's conquests continue to reverberate through time. Ah, Hernán Cortés, a name that conjures images of daring exploration and ruthless conquest. But as the dust settled on his exploits, what exactly did he leave behind? Was he a visionary trailblazer, or merely a cunning opportunist who happened to be in the right place at the right time? The legacy of Cortés is as tangled as a soap opera plot, filled with twists, turns, and more layers than a milfoil pastry. First off, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the gold-encrusted Aztec ruins. The fall of Tenochtitlan in 1521 didn't just mark the collapse of an empire. It was the opening act in a new era of colonial exploitation and cultural upheaval in the Americas. Cortés's conquest effectively paved the way for the Spanish to establish a vast colonial empire, stretching from California to the tip of South America. This wasn't just about land. It was about establishing a European foothold that would alter the course of history. The Spanish crown reaped immense wealth from its colonies, buoyed by the influx of gold and silver from the New World. We're talking about a treasure trove that would make even the greediest pirate blush. But let's not gloss over the human cost. Cortés's actions unleashed a wave of devastation upon indigenous populations. The introduction of European diseases like smallpox led to a catastrophic decline in the native population. By some estimates, the indigenous population of Mexico plummeted from around 25 million in 1519 to just 1 million by the end of the century. It was a demographic collapse that makes the Black Death look like a minor inconvenience. Yet, in the grand narrative of history, these grim statistics often get overshadowed by tales of conquest and glory. Cortés also left a cultural legacy that was both transformative and tragic. The fusion of Spanish and indigenous cultures gave birth to a new mestizo identity, a blend of European and native elements that shaped the social fabric of Latin America. The Spanish imposed their language, religion, and customs, but they couldn't erase indigenous influences entirely. From architecture to cuisine, the legacy of this cultural collision is still visible today. It's a reminder that history is rarely black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of complexities. Now, let's tackle the legend versus reality conundrum. Cortés has been cast as both a hero and a villain, depending on which side of the Atlantic you're standing. In Spain, he was celebrated as a national hero, a man who expanded the empire and enriched the crown. His daring exploits were romanticized in literature and art, painting him as a chivalric figure on a noble quest. It's the kind of narrative that makes for great bedtime stories, if you conveniently ignore the bloodshed and betrayal. Meanwhile, in Mexico and among indigenous communities, Cortés is often viewed through a much darker lens. He's the embodiment of colonial oppression, a figure whose actions led to the loss of life, land, and culture. The romanticized image of the conquistador doesn't hold much water when you're faced with the harsh realities of conquest. It's like idolizing a rock star for their music while ignoring the hotel rooms they trashed along the way. But history has a way of complicating even the most straightforward tales. Cortés's story is a study in contradictions. He was a man of immense ambition and undeniable charisma, yet also capable of ruthless pragmatism and moral ambiguity. He was a master strategist who understood the art of war and the power of alliances, yet he was also a gambler who often betted all on the roll of the dice. It's a legacy that's hard to pin down, like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. As we sift through the ashes of Cortés's life, it's tempting to paint him as either a visionary or a villain, but the truth is, he was both and neither. He was a product of his time, a man shaped by the socio-political and economic forces of the 16th century. His actions were driven by the same motivations that have propelled explorers and conquerors throughout history: the pursuit of wealth, power, and immortality. In the grand tapestry of history, Cortés is but one thread, woven into a complex narrative that continues to unfold. So, what can we take away from the saga of Hernán Cortés? Perhaps it's a reminder that history is as much about perspective as it is about facts. The same actions that earned Cortés accolades in one corner of the world brought condemnation in another. It's a story that challenges us to question the narratives we've been fed and to seek out the nuanced truths that lie beneath the surface. After all, history isn't just a collection of dates and events. It's a mirror reflecting the complexities of human nature. And as we close the book on Cortés, it's worth remembering that his legacy is still very much alive. The echoes of his conquests reverberate through time, shaping the world in ways that continue to resonate today. Whether we see him as a hero or a villain, Cortés's story is a testament to the enduring power of ambition and the indelible mark it leaves on history. So, the next time you find yourself pondering the past, remember that history, much like Cortés himself, is a multifaceted puzzle, one that's never quite finished and always open to interpretation. In the grand tapestry of human history, few threads weave as captivating a tale as the rise of the Persian Empire, and this story starts with a man named Cyrus the Great. Now, don't let that great fool you into thinking he was some kind of ancient superhero cruising around on a chariot with a cape. Cyrus was more like the Steve Jobs of ancient conquerors, revolutionizing the world stage with his ambitious vision. By the time he was done, he had assembled an empire that sprawled over 1 million square miles. Yes, you heard that right. That's about the size of 2 Indias, or, for those with a penchant for the American landscape, roughly 38 Texases. Yeehaw! Cyrus's empire wasn't just about the land. It was a melting pot of cultures, a veritable United Nations of its time. With a population as diverse as a New York City subway car during rush hour, the Persian Empire was home to Persians, Medes, Babylonians, Lydians, and many more. Each brought their own languages, guards, and customs to the table, creating a cultural buffet that was as rich as it was complex. This was no small feat, mind you. Just imagine trying to herd all these different peoples without the help of a single smartphone or email. Cyrus did it with sheer charisma and a talent for diplomacy that would make even the most seasoned politician take notes. But let's not get too misty-eyed over the glory days of Cyrus. While the legends paint him as a benevolent ruler, there's no denying he was also a shrewd tactician. He knew when to wield the carrot and when to brandish the stick. His approach to governance was like a well-played game of chess. He had to think several moves ahead, anticipating rebellions and quelling uprisings before they could gain traction. Inscriptions left by Cyrus himself, like the famous Cyrus cylinder, boast of his conquests and his commitment to restoring temples and returning displaced peoples to their homelands. Of course, it was a good PR move, too nothing like a little divine favor to keep the masses on your side. Fast forward to the time of Darius I, and the Persian Empire is already a colossal entity, but it's teetering on the edge of chaos. The transition from Cyrus to his successors wasn't exactly a smooth ride. Picture a Game of Thrones episode sans the CGI dragons, but with just as much intrigue and betrayal. Enter Darius the Great, a man with the political savvy of a Machiavellian prince and the ambition to match. Darius wasn't just some random guy who stumbled into power. No, sir. He was a member of the Achaemenid dynasty, but not directly in line for the throne. His rise was a masterclass in opportunism and strategy. Darius claimed the throne in 522 BCE after a rather murky episode involving a usurper known as Gormada, who had impersonated the recently deceased King Bardia. Darius, with the help of a few trusty nobles, managed to eliminate the impostor and seize the throne. Talk about cutting through the bureaucratic red tape. The story goes that Darius justified his actions through divine mandate, claiming the god Ahura Mazda had chosen him to rule. Hey, if you're going to make a power grab, might as well have the divine seal of approval right. The Behistun inscription, a massive rock relief carved into the cliffs of western Iran, is Darius's version of a LinkedIn profile, detailing his rise to power and his legitimacy as the ruler. It's a fascinating read if you're fluent in Old Persian, Elamite, or Akkadian. For the rest of us, it's a stark reminder of the lengths to which rulers went to solidify their claims. Under Darius, the Persian Empire didn't just hold its ground, it expanded and thrived. He reorganized the sprawling empire into satrapies, or provinces, each overseen by a governor, effectively creating one of the first known bureaucracies. It was like the world's earliest version of a multinational corporation, with Darius as the CEO, managing a diverse workforce spread over continents. Darius also understood the importance of infrastructure. He embarked on ambitious building projects, including the famous Royal Road, which stretched over 600 miles from Sardis to Susa. This road was the ancient equivalent of a superhighway, allowing messages and goods to travel faster than ever before. Herodotus, the Greek historian, famously remarked on the efficiency of the Persian postal system, noting that neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night could stop these couriers. Sound familiar? That's because it's the unofficial motto of the United States Postal Service today. Talk about staying power. Economically, Darius was no slouch either. He standardized weights and measures and introduced a new currency, the daric, which helped facilitate trade across the empire's vast expanse. As a result, the empire experienced a period of economic prosperity that was the envy of the ancient world. Not bad for a guy who started his reign by putting down a pretender. Yet, for all his achievements, Darius's reign wasn't without its challenges. Maintaining control over such a vast and diverse empire required constant vigilance. Revolts were a perennial problem, with uprisings flaring up in Egypt, Babylon, and beyond. Darius's ability to suppress these rebellions while still pushing forward with his grand projects speaks volumes about his capacity as a ruler. It's a testament to his skill that he managed to maintain the empire's integrity for as long as he did. As we set the stage for Darius's rise, it's clear that his story is one of ambition, intrigue, and innovation. He was a ruler who understood the power of narrative, using inscriptions and monuments to craft his legacy. But behind the grandeur and the propaganda lies the reality of a man navigating the complex web of politics, culture, and economics. It's a tale with all the makings of an epic saga, minus the dragons, but with plenty of fire. Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning. And now, as we continue this tale, we turn our gaze to the stone and splendor of Persepolis. If Darius the Great was the ancient world's equivalent of a corporate mogul, then Persepolis was his gleaming headquarters, a veritable palace of power and prestige carved into the heart of the Persian Empire. Let's be clear, this wasn't just some weekend DIY project. We're talking about an architectural endeavor that would make even the ancient Egyptians say, "Whoa, that's a bit much." Persepolis, or Parsa, as the locals called it, was designed to be a display of imperial bling, the ultimate expression of Darius's vision, and dare we say, his ego. Laid out over 125,000 square meters, it was a place where the empire's diverse cultures were meant to converge in a grand display of unity and might. But don't let the shiny marble and intricate carvings fool you. This was as much about political power as it was about architectural prowess. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. The centerpiece of Persepolis was the Apadana, a massive audience hall that could accommodate thousands. Imagine a space with 72 columns, each towering over 60 feet high, as if the ancient world was trying to reach the gods with stone instead of prayers. And let's not forget the staircases adorned with reliefs of tribute bearers from every corner of the empire. It was a visual who's who of the ancient world, and it spoke volumes about the empire's reach, each tribute a reminder of Darius's supremacy. Of course, building a mega project like Persepolis wasn't as simple as hiring a bunch of stone masons and hoping for the best. No, this was a logistical feat that required a workforce as multicultural as the empire itself. Workers came from across the vast Persian lands, Egyptians, Babylonians, Greeks, and more. It was like an ancient version of a United Nations construction team. And while this might sound like a harmonious gathering, let's not romanticize it too much. The reality was far from an idyllic mosaic of cultures. Labor was often backbreaking, and the conditions could be brutal. The human cost was as significant as the financial one. Speaking of finances, Darius wasn't just splashing cash around like an ancient tycoon with a bottomless purse. The project was estimated to have cost a staggering amount, both in terms of resources and manpower. It wasn't just the grandeur of the structures, but the intricate details, golden accents, imported cedar wood from Lebanon, and precious stones that made Persepolis a colossal investment. To put it into perspective, this wasn't just a city. It was a testament to what imperial wealth could achieve when funneled into stone. Now, it's easy to get swept up in the romance of it all, the grandiosity, the artistic achievements. But we must also ask, was Persepolis a genuine symbol of unity, or was it just Darius flexing his imperial muscles? The cynic might argue the latter. After all, what better way to assert your dominance than by erecting a stone metropolis that screams, "I am here, and I am powerful"? It's the ancient equivalent of buying a sports car to show you've arrived. Only instead of a Ferrari, Darius went with a stone metropolis. Yet, beyond the showmanship, Persepolis served a practical function. It was here that Darius and his successors would host Nowruz, the Persian New Year festival, a time when satraps, think regional governors, came bearing gifts and pledges of loyalty. It was as much about renewing bonds as it was about showcasing the empire's might. In this sense, Persepolis was a stage upon which the empire's continued narrative of power and prestige was performed year after year. But let's not give Darius all the credit, or blame, just yet. Persepolis would continue to evolve long after his reign, with subsequent kings adding their own touches. Think of it as a living canvas, constantly updated to reflect the empire's changing face. However, the seeds of its grandeur were planted firmly by Darius, setting the stage for what would become one of the ancient world's most iconic capitals. As we stand in the shadow of Persepolis, it's clear that Darius's ambitions were as towering as the columns he commissioned. Yet, was this an enduring symbol of a great empire, or just an elaborate facade hiding the empire's vulnerabilities? Perhaps both. The story of Persepolis is as much about the stone and splendor as it is about the people who toiled to create it, and the ruler whose legacy it sought to immortalize. And so, we leave Persepolis for now, a monument not just to Darius's ambition, but to the complex web of power, politics, and human endeavor that underpinned the Persian Empire. As the columns stand tall, so too does our curiosity about what comes next in this epic tale of empire and ambition. Stay tuned, because there's much more to explore. As we leave the grandeur of Persepolis in the rearview mirror, Let's shift gears to another facet of Darius's empire that was less about stone palaces and more about cold, hard cash, or more accurately, gold. Welcome to the world of Darius the Great, the man who might just have been the original capitalist in royal robes. Picture this, an empire so vast it stretched from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River, yet somehow Darius managed to keep it all together with the economic equivalent of duct tape and dollar bills. Let's talk about that duct tape. Darius introduced the gold daric, a coin that became the ancient world's equivalent of the US dollar. This little nugget of gold was worth its weight in, well, gold, weighing in at about 4 grams. The daric was minted with precision and uniformity, a symbol of economic stability in a world where bartering was still the main event. It was a game changer, folks. By standardizing currency, Darius made it easier for traders to do business without having to lug around livestock or haggle over the value of their goods. Imagine a Lydian merchant trying to trade a camel for a sack of Babylonian spices. Awkward, right? Thanks to the daric, transactions could be settled in a jingle of coins, not a caravan of camels. But why stop at a shiny new currency? Darius knew that to bankroll an empire, you needed more than just money. You needed a way to move it around. Enter the Royal Road, a 600-mile stretch of ancient infrastructure that connected the far-flung corners of the Persian Empire like a stone and dirt internet. It wasn't just a road. It was the backbone of Darius's economic strategy. Think of it as the Silk Road's older, more sophisticated cousin, complete with its own express mail service. Herodotus, the Greek historian who seemed to have a penchant for Persian postal affairs, famously noted the efficiency of these couriers, and for good reason. Messages could travel from Susa to Sardis in just 9 days. That's faster than some modern postal services, and they didn't even have trucks. The Royal Road wasn't just for letters and imperial decrees. It was a bustling artery of commerce, a place where merchants, soldiers, and travelers rubbed elbows and traded stories, goods, and probably a few choice insults. It allowed for the easy movement of troops, enabling Darius to deploy his army with the speed and precision of a chess master moving his pieces. In a sense, the road was Darius's secret weapon, a strategic advantage that kept his empire both connected and protected. And while it was a marvel of engineering, let's not romanticize the experience. The journey was no scenic road trip. It was dusty, grueling, and fraught with the occasional bandit or unruly weather. Travelers had to be made of tough stuff, or at least have a good sense of humor and a trusty sword. But let's get to the meat and potatoes of this economic strategy. Darius wasn't just building roads and minting coins for the fun of it. He had armies to fund, rebellions to quell, and a reputation to uphold. The daric and the Royal Road were more than just tools of trade. They were instruments of power. By consolidating economic control, Darius ensured that his vast empire could function like a well-oiled machine, churning out resources and revenue while keeping dissent under wraps. The economic prosperity that followed wasn't just a happy accident. It was a calculated result of Darius's policies. He had effectively turned the empire into a massive corporation, with satraps acting as regional managers and the Royal Road as its supply chain. Yet, for all the shiny coins and impressive infrastructure, there's a less glamorous side to this economic saga. The empire's wealth was built on a foundation of taxes, tributes, and let's face it, a fair bit of exploitation. Darius's administration levied taxes with the efficiency of a modern IRS, ensuring that every satrapy paid its dues. These taxes funded not only the military, but also the grandiose projects that darted the empire. While the daric facilitated trade, it also made it easier to extract wealth from the provinces. It was a double-edged sword, a tool of both prosperity and control. So, was Darius the original capitalist king? In some ways, yes. He understood the power of economic stability and the importance of a strong central currency. But let's remember, this wasn't capitalism as we know it today. It was more of a command economy with capitalist overtones, an empire driven by the need to sustain itself through economic strength and military might. And while the system worked, it was also a delicate balance. One wrong move, and the whole thing could come crashing down like a poorly built ziggurat. As we ponder the economic legacy of Darius, it's clear that his strategies were as much about maintaining power as they were about fostering prosperity. The gold daric, and the royal road were symbols of an empire at its height, yet they also hinted at the complexities and contradictions of imperial rule. Darius might not have worn a top hat or carried a monocle, but he certainly had the business acumen to rival any modern-day mogul. And as the coins clinked and the dust settled on the royal road, the Persian Empire marched on, a testament to the enduring power of economic innovation and imperial ambition. Stay tuned for the next installment, where we'll dig deeper into the political machinations that kept this empire ticking and unravel the intricate web of alliances and rivalries that defined an era. There's much more to uncover in this epic tale of power, profit, and the human condition. But let's not get too comfortable with our economic musings, because Darius wasn't the type to sit idly counting coins while sipping on a goblet of wine. No, this ruler had bigger fish to fry, or in this case, Greeks. Our man Darius had his sights set on expanding the Persian Empire into Greece, a task that sounds about as easy as herding cats across the Acropolis. So, why Greece, you ask? Well, apart from the Mediterranean allure of feeder cheese and philosophy, Greece held a strategic position that could serve as a launchpad for further European adventures. Also, it didn't hurt that some of those pesky Greek city-states had supported revolts against Persian rule in Ionia. Darius wasn't exactly the forgive-and-forget type. He wanted to send a message, a loud, clear one, that Persian authority was not to be trifled with. Enter the Battle of Marathon in 490 BCE, a key moment in Darius's military campaigns that's still talked about today. Now, if you think running 26, 2 miles is tough. Imagine doing it with an army on your heels. The Persians landed on the plain of Marathon with a force that, by some accounts, numbered around 25, 000 to 30, 000 men. The Greeks, meanwhile, managed to muster a force of about 10, 000 Athenians and 1,000 Plataeans. Talk about being outnumbered. It was like David versus Goliath, only with more bronze and less divine intervention. Darius's plan was straightforward: steamroll the Greek forces and move on to Athens for a decisive win. But here's where things got interesting. The Greeks, led by the strategos, General Miltiades, executed a brilliant tactical maneuver. They reinforced their flanks and thinned their center, creating a formation that enveloped the Persian forces. In the chaos of battle, the Persian troops were routed, and those who weren't cut down fled to their ships. Despite their numerical advantage, the Persians suffered a humiliating defeat, losing around 400 men compared to the Greeks' mere 192. Ouch. Now, let's pause for some myth-busting. The romantic tale of Pheidipides running from Marathon to Athens to deliver news of victory, and then keeling over dead, is, well, more fiction than fact. The truth is, Pheidipides was sent to Sparta before the battle to request reinforcements, covering an impressive 150 miles in 2 days. The post-battle run to Athens is likely an embellishment, but why let facts get in the way of a good story, right? So, what went wrong for Darius? Well, the logistical challenges of ancient warfare were nothing to sneeze at. Coordinating a massive army across the Aegean Sea was like trying to organize a family reunion on a sinking cruise ship. Supplies had to be transported, troops fed, and morale maintained, all without the luxury of modern logistics. And let's not forget the terrain. The Greeks knew their land like the back of their hand, while the Persians were essentially playing an away game, and we all know how those tend to go. Yet, Darius's strategic brilliance shouldn't be underestimated. He was a master of logistics, capable of assembling a diverse army from across his empire. The fact that he even attempted such a campaign speaks to his ambition and organizational skills. But ambition can be a double-edged sword, and sometimes it's better to stick to what you know best, like building roads and minting coins. Darius's Greek ambitions didn't end at Marathon, though. He was determined to conquer the pesky Greeks, but fate had other plans. The old king died in 486 BCE, leaving the task to his son, Xerxes, who would famously take another crack at it. But that's a story for another day. In hindsight, the Battle of Marathon was a turning point, not just for the Greeks, but for the Persian Empire. It marked the beginning of a series of conflicts that would eventually culminate in the famous wars chronicled by Herodotus. It also served as a reminder that even the most well-oiled imperial machine can hit a snag when faced with determined opposition and clever tactics. So, as we wrap up this chapter of Darius's story, we're left pondering the what-ifs. What if Darius had succeeded? Would we have seen a Persian Greece, with satrapies stretching across the Peloponnese? Or would the empire have eventually stretched itself too thin, crumbling under its own weight? These are the tantalizing questions of history, reminders that the past is never as straightforward as it seems. Stay tuned, because the tale of the Persian Empire is far from over. In the next installment, we'll dive into the political machinations and alliances that kept the empire afloat, exploring the delicate balance of power that defined an era. The saga continues, with more intrigue, ambition, and a few surprises along the way. As we wade through the turbulent seas of Persian history, let's cast our nets on Darius's legacy, a topic as vast and complex as the empire he ruled. Now, Darius was no slouch when it came to governance. In fact, he was the ancient world's equivalent of a bureaucratic wizard, conjuring order out of chaos with a flick of his administrative wand. But was it all just a triumph of governance, or did he leave behind a colossal headache wrapped in a golden bow? Darius's empire was a sprawling behemoth, stretching from the sweltering banks of the Nile to the icy peaks of the Hindu Kush, covering about 9 million square miles. That's nearly half the size of the United States today. Managing such a vast expanse was like trying to run a marathon while juggling flaming torches and reciting the Iliad. Yet, Darius tackled it with a blend of strategic genius and sheer determination. His solution, divide and conquer, but in a managerial sense. He carved the empire into about 20 satrapies or provinces, each with its own governor or satrap. These satraps were like regional managers, tasked with keeping the peace, collecting taxes, and most importantly, staying in Darius's good graces. This system was revolutionary, a precursor to modern federal governance. It allowed for localized control while maintaining imperial oversight. But let's not romanticize it too much. For the satraps, this wasn't a cushy desk job with a corner office and a view. It was more like being a tightrope walker, constantly balancing the interests of the local populace with the demands of the imperial center. Step out of line, and you could find yourself on the wrong end of Darius's wrath, metaphorically or literally, depending on how severe the transgression. Now, the idea of a centralized bureaucracy sounds like a dream for all you organization lovers out there. But in reality, it was a logistical nightmare. Communication across thousands of miles without the luxury of instant messaging was slower than a camel on a lazy Sunday. Orders had to be relayed via couriers who galloped at breakneck speed along the royal road, dodging dust storms and bandits, all to ensure that Darius's edicts were enacted. It was a system that relied heavily on trust and the integrity of the satraps, a risky gamble in an age where loyalty was as fickle as the wind. Yet, Darius's administrative prowess was undeniable. He introduced standardized laws and a single currency, the daric, which not only streamlined trade but also unified the empire under a common economic system. It was like giving the empire a financial facelift, a shiny new look that impressed both friends and foes. And while this system worked wonders in Darius's time, it hinged heavily on his personal charisma and authority. Without him, it was like a well-tuned orchestra suddenly losing its conductor. And that's precisely where the wheels started to wobble post-Darius. His death in 486 BCE left a void that even the most capable successor struggled to fill. Enter Xerxes, Darius's son, who inherited the empire, but not quite his father's knack for diplomacy and governance. Xerxes' reign saw the empire's first real signs of strain, with revolts flaring up like brushfires across its vast territories. Egypt and Babylon, ever the rebellious teenagers, shook their fists and demanded independence, testing the limits of Persian control. The irony here is thick enough to spread on toast. Darius had created a system that was both his greatest achievement and his empire's Achilles heel. The very satrapies that held the empire together became potential fracture points in less capable hands. The intricate balance of power, so delicately maintained by Darius, began to tilt, and the empire's vastness, once its strength, became its greatest vulnerability. Yet, for all the cracks that appeared, Darius's blueprint for empire building left a lasting legacy. Future rulers, from Alexander the Great to the Roman emperors, took notes on Persian governance like eager students in a masterclass. The concept of a centralized administration, a standardized economy, and a network of roads connecting far-flung territories became the gold standard for imperial rule. Darius had laid down a blueprint that others would follow, adapt, and sometimes improve upon. But let's not kid ourselves into thinking that empire building is all about enlightened governance and economic prosperity. The stark reality of ancient imperialism is that it was built on the backs of the conquered, fueled by exploitation, and maintained through force. While we can admire Darius's achievements, it's crucial to acknowledge the human cost of his empire, a story often glossed over in the grand narratives of history. So, as we wrap up our journey through the Persian Empire under Darius the Great, we're left with a tapestry woven with ambition, innovation, and harsh realities. His empire was both a triumph of governance and a monumental headache, a testament to the heights humanity can achieve and the pitfalls that lurk along the way. And as the sun sets on this chapter of history, one thing remains clear. The legacy of Darius the Great is a complex one, a mix of romance and reality that continues to captivate and challenge us today. Thanks for joining me on this epic ride through time. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and remember, history is never as straightforward as it seems. Before the Greeks and Romans strutted their stuff around the Mediterranean like they owned the place, there was the Minoan civilization, casually building cities that would make today's urban planners weak in the knees. We're talking about a people who thought, hey, what if we didn't throw our waste out the window? And then invented plumbing in 2000 BCE. That's right, the Minoans were flushing their problems down pipes, while the rest of the world was tossing theirs into the streets. Let's dive into the world of these ancient innovators who set up shop on the island of Crete around 3000 BCE, long before anyone thought to call that stretch of land the cradle of Western civilization. Crete isn't just some sun-drenched Mediterranean island where people sip ouzo and dance the sirtaki. It's a strategic gem, slap bang in the middle of the sea, perfect for trade, cultural exchange, and the occasional bout of territorial squabbling. The Minoans figured this out early on and set up their civilization with a swagger that would make even the most seasoned real estate mogul envious. By 2000 BCE, they'd established Knossos, their crown jewel, a city that was less about towering skyscrapers and more about labyrinthine palaces and advanced urban planning. Knossos was the kind of place where you could get lost looking for the bathroom, but you'd be impressed by the architecture while doing so. Now, let's talk about these Minoan cities, which were like the Silicon Valley of the ancient world. They were bustling, innovative, and ahead of their time. They didn't just build practical cities, they built cities with flair. Their urban planning was so advanced that they had streets, drainage systems, and multi-story buildings. Yes, the Minoans were going vertical before it was cool. Their cities were like a Pinterest board of architectural ambition, each detail meticulously planned to show off their sophistication and no doubt make their neighbors a little jealous. And what about their plumbing? Oh, the Minoan plumbing. It was the Rolls-Royce of sanitation systems, a luxury that would make even modern homeowners green with envy. These ancient engineers crafted elaborate systems that included aqueducts, cisterns, and even flush toilets. They were the kind of people who didn't just talk about improving their quality of life. They literally piped it into their homes. While the Romans would later get all the credit for their aqueducts, the Minoans were the unsung heroes who laid the groundwork for indoor plumbing, thereby sparing countless future generations from the joys of chamber pots. But wait, there's more. The Minoans didn't just stop at creating cities that were clean and well-ordered. They also had a calendar that was more accurate than the one Julius Caesar introduced to Rome in 45 BCE. Seriously, the Julian calendar was so off that by the Middle Ages, Easter was threatening to become a summer holiday. The Minoans, on the other hand, had a system so precise that it could have given Swiss watchmakers a run for their money. Their calendar was based on astronomical observations, showcasing their deep understanding of the cosmos long before anyone thought to name stars after Hollywood celebrities. Speaking of the cosmos, the Minoans had a knack for blending practicality with the mystical. Their society was a harmonious mix of trade, art, and religion, with each aspect complementing the others like a well-curated Spotify playlist. They worshipped gods and goddesses who demanded elaborate rituals, some of which involved jumping over bulls. That's right, bull leaping was a thing. It was part religion, part sport, and all adrenaline, a kind of ancient extreme sport that would make today's bungee jumpers look like amateurs. But don't let the romanticized images of bull leaping fool you. It was as dangerous as it sounds, and not everyone landed on their feet. In all this grandeur and innovation, the Minoans weren't just building structures. They were crafting an identity. They were the original influencers, setting trends in art and architecture that would ripple through history. Their frescoes were vibrant and full of life, depicting scenes of nature, society, and of course, bull leaping. These were not just decorations. They were statements of power and creativity, a reflection of a society that thrived on its own terms. The Minoans were like the hipsters of the ancient world, doing their own thing while the rest of the world was still figuring out how to boil water. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. The reality was that the Minoans were not immune to the challenges that come with running a civilization. They had to deal with natural disasters, shifting political landscapes, and the ever-present threat of invasion. Crete's position in the Mediterranean was both a blessing and a curse. It was a prime spot for trade, but also a tempting target for conquest. The Minoans had to be savvy diplomats and shrewd traders, ensuring their survival amidst the ebb and flow of ancient geopolitics. So, there you have it. The Minoans were a civilization that seemed to have it all: advanced technology, a robust economy, and a culture that was as vibrant as it was complex. They were the original trailblazers, setting the stage for future civilizations to build upon their foundations. As we continue to explore their rise and eventual fall, keep in mind that the story of the Minoans is not just about what they built, but about the legacy they left behind. They were a people who dared to dream big, and in doing so, left an indelible mark on history. All right, let's sail into the bustling world of the Minoan economy, where trade was the lifeblood and the sea was their oyster. These folks weren't just dabbling in commerce. They were the Jeff Bezos of the Bronze Age, minus the space rockets. Situated smack dab in the Mediterranean, Crete was the perfect launchpad for a maritime empire. The Minoans had a knack for turning their island into an ancient version of a duty-free shop, offering everything from pottery to saffron. They navigated the treacherous waters like pros, swapping goods with Egypt, Mesopotamia, and even distant Cyprus. Their trade network was as expansive as an epic poem. It brought in goods that would fill a modern-day shopping cart faster than you can say Black Friday. The Minoans didn't just trade in trinkets. They were dealing in serious commodities: timber, wool, olive oil, and a luxury item that would make Cleopatra herself raise an eyebrow: purple dye. And we're not talking about your run-of-the-mill color here. This was Tyrian purple, extracted painfully drop by drop from sea snails. It was the kind of color that screamed power and wealth, a hue so rich it might as well have been the Bitcoin of its day. Their ships weren't just floating markets. They were the ancient equivalent of Amazon Prime, delivering exotic goods with a speed that would make Hermes envious. This maritime hustle and bustle turned the Minoans into a juggernaut of economic power, their coffers as full as their ships. Now, let's dive into the splash of color that was Minoan art, a kaleidoscope of creativity that could rival a 1960 tie-dye festival. Minoan frescoes were a celebration of life, nature, and the human form. Their art wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a visual language, a vibrant communication of their culture and beliefs. The walls of Knossos were adorned with scenes of dolphins leaping through the sea, ladies in flounced skirts engaging in lively conversation, and of course, those daring bull leapers we've already gotten a taste of. It's like the Minoans were saying, why settle for beige when you can have the whole rainbow? What's truly fascinating is how these frescoes go beyond mere decoration. They offer glimpses into a society where women played a starring role, not just in art, but in life. Unlike many ancient cultures, where women were often relegated to the shadows, Minoan women appeared to have had a front-row seat in society. They were depicted in positions of prominence, wielding power with a confidence that would make some modern CEOs take notes. Whether they were priestesses, merchants, or influential matriarchs, women in Minoan society had a presence that was as pronounced as their colorful wardrobes. But hold on to your laurel wreaths, because it's time to bust a few myths. The Minoans have often been romanticized as a peaceful, idyllic society where everyone was too busy painting frescoes to bother with warfare. This image of the Minoans as the ultimate peaceniks is a tad misleading. While it's true that they preferred commerce over conflict, evidence suggests they were no strangers to the art of war. Archaeologists have uncovered fortifications, weapons, and armor that tell a story of a people who knew how to defend themselves when push came to shove. For instance, the site of Malia, one of the significant Minoan palatial centers, sports stone walls thick enough to make any invader think twice. And let's not forget the weapons. Swords, daggers, and spearheads have been found, indicating that the Minoans were ready to rumble if necessary. It seems they understood that peace was best achieved when backed by a strong armory. So, while they weren't exactly the Spartans, the Minoans could certainly hold their own in a scuffle. The Minoan society was a complex tapestry, woven with threads of trade, art, and gender dynamics, all set against a backdrop of potential conflict. They were the embodiment of the saying, "Speak softly and carry a big stick," though in their case it was more like, "Paint beautifully and carry a sharp sword." This duality of peace and protection, of art and arms, made the Minoans a fascinating study in contrasts, a society that flourished by embracing both the creative and the pragmatic. As we explore the rise and eventual decline of this enigmatic civilization, it's essential to remember that the Minoans were pioneers, navigating the tumultuous seas of history with a deftness that belied their ancient origins. Their legacy is a reminder that even in the ancient world, it was possible to balance beauty and strength, to trade and protect, and to create a society that was both complex and vibrant. So, as we prepare to delve deeper into the mysteries of the Minoans, keep in mind that their story is as much about the lessons they left behind as it is about the ruins they left on Crete. As we venture further into the labyrinth of Minoan history, let's untangle the political web that kept this civilization humming along, or at least kept its rulers from spiraling into chaos. Now, picture the Minoan kings, or possibly queens, perched atop their thrones in Knossos, juggling the demands of an empire with the finesse of a circus performer. These leaders could have used a PR team that would make any modern spin doctor proud, given the complexity of their bureaucratic systems. The Minoan political structure was like one of their fabled labyrinths, intricate, perhaps a bit dizzying, and undoubtedly designed to keep folks on their toes. Unlike the one-man show of pharaohs in Egypt, or the later, well-documented democratic experiment in Athens, Minoan governance was more of a group project. It's believed they had a kind of council or assembly, possibly involving elite families who shared power. This isn't exactly a first-past-the-post system. It's more like a family meeting where everyone's trying to grab the TV remote. Now, let's talk about the bureaucratic machinery that would make Kafka proud. The Minoans had scribes who recorded everything on clay tablets using a script known as lineae. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of filing taxes, except you don't get a refund. Unfortunately, like taxes, lineae remains largely undeciphered, a cryptic reminder that some mysteries prefer to stay unsolved. But from what we gather, these tablets were likely filled with records of trade transactions, inventories, and perhaps the occasional gossip about who was seen leaping over bulls the previous weekend. But if you think the Minoans were content to just shuffle papers on their sunny island, think again. They were the social butterflies of the ancient world, flitting between civilizations like the ultimate networkers. Their interactions with the Egyptians are a prime example. Picture the scene. Minoan traders docking their sleek ships along the Nile, unloading goods that would make even Cleopatra pout in envy. Egypt provided a market for Minoan products like their famous saffron, while in return they absorbed influences like Egyptian art and religious practices. It was a two-way street of goods, ideas, and perhaps the occasional awkward cultural misunderstanding. The Egyptians, in turn, must have admired the Minoans' craftsmanship, especially their pottery. Ah, Minoan pottery. Those vessels were the ancient version of the minibar, providing not just storage, but a touch of luxury. These weren't just clay pots for your morning oats. They were beautifully decorated, often with motifs of swirling seas and flora that scream, "We have time for aesthetics." Their pottery was so advanced it bordered on the avant-garde, with designs that might still pass for chic in a Brooklyn loft. And here's where it gets juicy. The Minoans were likely the first to put the min in Minoan by inventing the proto-minibar. Imagine a Minoan household with a selection of oils, wines, and perfumes, all neatly stored in these decorative vessels. It was a mark of sophistication, a hint that this was a society that knew how to enjoy the finer things. The Minoans were not just about survival. They were about living well, with a flair for luxury that was as much a part of their identity as their bull-leaping acrobatics. While we're busy romanticizing their lifestyle, let's not forget that even the best parties have to be funded somehow. The Minoan economy was a well-oiled machine, and their political system had to ensure it kept running smoothly. This meant keeping a balance between maintaining power at home and ensuring peace and profitable trade abroad. It's a juggling act worthy of Cirque du Soleil, with each ball representing a different aspect of governance. But what happens when the music stops? The Minoans had to face the harsh realities of natural disasters, like the infamous eruption of Thera, modern Santorini, around 1600 BCE, which sent shockwaves through their civilization. It's like planning a barbecue and having a volcano crash the party. The political implications of such events were immense, challenging their leadership and straining their resources. It's a reminder that while myths and legends paint the Minoans as these almost mythical beings, they were very much human, dealing with the same unpredictability that life throws at us today. As we continue to unravel the Minoan mystery, it's crucial to see them in all their complexity, not just as the architects of stunning palaces and intricate art, but as savvy politicians and traders. Their story is a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of a civilization that navigated the choppy waters of history with grace, even if their ultimate fate was as turbulent as the seas they called home. So, stay tuned as we journey deeper into the world of the Minoans, where the line between legend and reality is as fluid as the waves lapping at the shores of Crete. Ah, the Minoans, balancing beauty and brains like a trapeze artist on a tightrope, but even the most skilled performers can slip. Enter the eruption of Thera around 1450 BCE, a volcanic display so spectacular it could have sold out stadiums. This explosive event was like throwing a stick of dynamite into a Jenga tower, and Crete was at the heart of the chaos. Forget reality TV. This was nature's own drama series, with special effects that would put any CGI to shame. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty. Thera, known today as Santorini, wasn't just a casual volcano. It was a geological diva with a flair for the dramatic. When it blew its top, it unleashed a tsunami that sent waves crashing onto Crete's northern shores like an overzealous rock concert crowd. But it wasn't just the water that did damage. The eruption spewed ash high into the atmosphere, creating a cloud that would make even the gloomiest Seattle day look like a beach holiday. This ash blanket didn't just dim the skies. It dimmed the Minoan economy, stifling agriculture and trade routes like an ancient version of gridlock traffic. And if that wasn't enough, the Minoans faced another issue. The Mycenaeans, who were as opportunistic as a seagull at a seaside picnic. These mainland Greeks were the new kids on the block, and they weren't just bringing casseroles. They were eyeing Minoan wealth with the same fervor as a bargain shopper on Black Friday. With Crete weakened by natural disasters, the Mycenaeans swooped in like history's equivalent of venture capitalists, ready to take over and, quite frankly, pillage whatever was left. The Mycenaeans weren't exactly subtle about it either. They set up shop in Minoan palaces, leaving behind artifacts that scream, "We were here," like a teenager's graffiti tag. Their influence spread faster than a viral meme, and before you could say bull leaping, the Minoans found themselves relegated to a supporting role in their own drama. It was as if the Mycenaeans had gate-crashed the party and then decided to become the DJs, changing the entire playlist. But let's not get too carried away with the bleakness here. While the Minoans were indeed facing tough times, it's important to note that their civilization didn't vanish overnight. No, it lingered, gradually fading out like a once popular boy band whose hit singles were now just background music in a grocery store. Their influence remained in the Mycenaean culture, a testament to the lasting impact of their art, architecture, and societal norms. The Minoans were the unsung heroes who set the stage for what would become classical Greek culture, even if they didn't get top billing. And now, let's wade into the murky waters of myth and reality. Ever heard the story of Atlantis? You know, that fabled island that sank into the ocean, never to be seen again. Many have tried to link the Minoans and Thera's eruption to this legend, like a historical game of connect the dots. But here's the thing. Atlantis is more Plato's brainchild than an actual place. Plato first mentioned it around 360 BCE, describing a utopian society that vanished beneath the waves due to its hubris. It's a tale as old as time, with a moral that would delight any ancient philosopher. But the allure of Atlantis is undeniable. It's become a cultural touchstone, inspiring countless books, movies, and conspiracy theories. Yet, despite the romantic appeal, there's no solid evidence linking the Minoans to this fabled land. The Minoans were real, tangible, and complex, not figments of imagination or morality tales. So while it's fun to imagine Crete as the original Atlantis, the reality is less mythical, but no less fascinating. The story of the Minoans is a reminder of the delicate dance civilizations perform on the stage of history. They built, they traded, they adapted, and yet they couldn't escape the whims of nature or the ambitions of their neighbors. Their decline was a slow unraveling rather than a dramatic fall, a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of a civilization that left an indelible mark on the ancient world. As we wrap up this chapter in the Minoan saga, keep in mind that their legacy is as much about what they left behind as what was lost. They were pioneers, setting cultural and technological foundations that would echo through the corridors of time. And while their civilization may have faded, their influence remained, shaping the world in ways that continue to surprise and inspire. So, what comes next in this archaeological soap opera? Stay tuned as we delve into the final act, where we'll explore the echoes of the Minoan legacy and how their story continues to captivate our imaginations today. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that the past is never truly gone. It lingers, like an old tune that you just can't get out of your head, waiting to be rediscovered and reinterpreted by each new generation. As the credits roll on the saga of the Minoans, let's take a step back and ponder their legacy. Were they the original hipsters, flaunting their avant-garde flair long before the term vintage was cool? It's tempting to imagine them sipping artisanal olive oil while discussing the latest in fresco art trends. After all, the Minoans were the pioneers of plumbing, the trailblazers of trade, and the maestros of multi-story architecture. They were laying down the cultural equivalent of vinyl records when the rest of the world was still fiddling with stone tools. Let's dive into their contributions that have left historians and archaeologists scratching their heads and nodding in appreciation. Minoan art, with its vibrant frescoes and intricate pottery, was like the Instagram of its day, a visual feast meant to impress and inspire. These works weren't just pretty pictures. They were storytelling devices, capturing the essence of Minoan life with all its complexities and contradictions. The famous Prince of the Lilies fresco, with its richly adorned figure, practically screams influencer status. It was art with a purpose, a way to communicate cultural values and societal roles without uttering a single word. Trade was another arena where the Minoans excelled. Their maritime prowess turned the Mediterranean into their personal trade highway, a sort of ancient Silk Road of the sea. They were dealing in saffron, olive oil, and that oh-so-coveted Tyrian purple dye like modern-day commodities traders. Their economic reach stretched across the known world, from Egypt to the Near East, creating a network as complex as a spider's web. They weren't just trading goods, they were exchanging ideas, a sort of intellectual currency that enriched both their own society and those they encountered. But let's not forget that this was a civilization that knew how to throw a party, or at least an event that involved a fair bit of bull leaping. The Minoans had a knack for blending the sacred with the spectacular, creating rituals that were equal parts religious devotion and adrenaline rush. Imagine combining the fervor of a rock concert with the precision of a Cirque du Soleil performance, and you're halfway there. These rituals were a testament to their innovative spirit, a way to celebrate life, and perhaps to appease the gods, who were as capricious as a modern-day reality TV star. Yet, for all their achievements, the Minoans weren't immune to the harsher realities of life. Their downfall wasn't some grand mystery shrouded in myth. It was a matter of Mother Nature having a particularly bad day, and the Mycenaeans seeing an opportunity to expand their own influence. The eruption of Thera was a cataclysmic event, a geological hiccup that sent shockwaves through their society. Couple that with the Mycenaean encroachment, and you have a recipe for a slow-motion decline rather than a sudden collapse. So, What do the Minoans teach us? Perhaps it's that innovation and creativity can flourish in the most unexpected places, even on an island in the middle of the Mediterranean. They remind us that civilizations, like fashion, are cyclical, rising, falling, and rising again in new forms. Their legacy is a testament to human ingenuity, a reminder that while the past may be prologue, it is also a source of endless inspiration and cautionary tales. As we close the book on the Minoans, let's not see them as mere relics of history, but as a vibrant part of the human story, one that continues to echo through the corridors of time. They were the original trendsetters, the proto-hipsters of their age, crafting a legacy that would weave its way into the tapestry of Western civilization. And while their civilization may have faded, their spirit of innovation and cultural richness remains very much alive, a reminder that even the most ancient of societies have something to teach us about the art of living. In the bustling heart of ancient Egypt, where the sun was as relentless as the politics, Ramses Roman III was about to step onto the stage of history. It's 1186 BC, and while the world was still figuring out the wheel and the basics of calendar keeping, Egypt was in a bit of a pickle. The throne had been vacated, and the kingdom wasn't exactly basking in a golden era of peace and prosperity. Think of it as the ancient world's equivalent of Game of Thrones, minus the dragons, but with double the backstabbing and sand. Enter Ramses Roman III, a guy who knew how to make an entrance. Crowned as the pharaoh, he was handed the keys to a kingdom that was more like a fixer-upper than a lavish palace. His predecessors had left him a bit of a mess. The treasury was leaner than a catwalk model, and the borders were more porous than a sieve. Not the kind of inheritance you'd hope for. But Ramses wasn't one to sit around and mope about his misfortunes. No, he was a man with a plan, albeit one that involved quite a bit of heavy lifting. First on his to-do list was dealing with the sea peoples. Now, if you've never heard of these guys, think of them as the ancient world's most irritating wedding crashers. They were a coalition of maritime marauders who traveled from who knows where with the sole intention of causing chaos. Their invasions were the stuff of nightmares for ancient kingdoms. They'd pop up out of nowhere, like sand flies at a picnic, and leave a trail of destruction in their wake. Ramses Roman III wasn't having any of it. In a series of battles that would make any action movie director drool with envy, Ramses Roman III showcased his strategic genius. He fortified Egypt's borders and set up a well-oiled military machine ready to kick some serious sea people butt. He understood that to win against these seasoned raiders, he needed more than just brute force. He needed cunning, foresight, and a bit of luck. And so, Ramses Roman III went to work. He beefed up his navy, understanding that the sea peoples were more comfortable on water than a duck during springtime. This wasn't merely about repelling an invasion. This was about sending a message. Ramses wanted the world to know that Egypt wasn't some pushover state ripe for plundering. No, Egypt was a power to be reckoned with, and Ramses Roman III was the man to make it known. The Battle of the Delta was where Ramses Roman III truly shone. Picture this. Egyptian ships lined the Nile, ready for what was essentially the ancient world's version of a naval showdown. Ramses, with his characteristic flair for drama, watched from the shore as his troops clashed with the sea peoples. The battle was as intense as it was crucial. An Egyptian scribe later wrote, "Their hearts were taken, their souls flew up," which, in layman's terms, means Ramses handed them a defeat so thorough it knocked the sandals right off their feet. But Ramses Roman III wasn't just a military man. He was astute enough to know that wars are won in the heart as much as on the battlefield. He capitalized on his victory with a propaganda campaign that would make modern PR firms nod in approval. He commissioned grand reliefs and inscriptions detailing his triumphs. These weren't just for bragging rights. They were to ensure that everyone, from the common farmer to the most distant ally, knew that under Ramses Roman III, Egypt was safe, stable, and strong. Of course, with all these victories, Ramses Roman III earned himself a reputation that resonated far beyond Egypt's borders. He was seen as the savior of Egypt, a title that came with both admiration and a target on his back. And while Ramses was busy cementing his legacy as one of Egypt's great pharaohs, he was also acutely aware of the political intrigue bubbling beneath the surface. The court was as treacherous as the battlefield. with plots and conspiracies swirling like the desert winds. But that's a tale for another day. For now, Ramses Roman III stood victorious, a king who had faced down the sea peoples and emerged triumphant. His strategies had saved Egypt from an uncertain fate, and his name was etched into the annals of history. But as we all know, power is a fickle friend, and Ramses Roman III's journey was far from over. The sands of time may shift. The legacy of a ruler like Ramses Roman III stands firm, at least until the next crisis rolls in. Now, just because Ramses Roman III had sent the sea peoples packing didn't mean he could rest easy on his laurels. No, the guy had an empire to run, and that empire wasn't going to manage itself. Cue Ramses switching from warlord mode to savvy statesman. If you thought he wielded a sword with finesse, wait till you see him juggle the needs of an entire nation. Spoiler alert, it involved a whole lot of bread and some seriously ambitious architectural projects. Let's talk logistics. Feeding Egypt was no small feat. Picture this, a population of millions, all with appetites as big as the Nile is long. Ramses needed to ensure the granaries were stocked, the farmers were happy, and the Nile's annual floods didn't decide to take a vacation. It was, quite literally, a balancing act of biblical proportions. And when I say biblical, I'm not just being dramatic. Grain was the lifeblood of Egypt, as precious as gold. Ramses Roman III knew that to keep the bread baskets full, he had to keep the farmers happy. But here's the kicker. The economy wasn't just about growing wheat. It was a complex web of trade, taxes, and temple offerings. Temples, you see, were more than just spiritual centers. They were the ancient world's version of a bustling marketplace, and a bank rolled into one. Ramses dumped vast resources into constructing these grand edifices. Why, you ask? Because a grand temple wasn't just an offering to the gods. It was a statement. It said, look how prosperous and pious we are. And that kind of PR was worth its weight in papyrus scrolls. Now, speaking of papyrus, Ramses funded these lavish projects with a keen eye on the treasury. It's easy to get swept up in the majesty of ancient monuments, but let's not kid ourselves. Those things didn't come cheap. Picture a construction budget that would make even a modern contractor wince. Stone by stone, Ramses built his legacy, but he also built what was essentially an ancient stimulus package. Funding temple projects created jobs and kept the economy humming. It was the ancient equivalent of a New Deal, minus the jazz. But Ramses' domestic affairs weren't all sunshine and obelisks. Remember the workers' strike at Deir el-Medina? Ah, yes. Even in ancient Egypt, the phrase, the checks in the mail, could spark a rebellion. These were the artisans and laborers responsible for crafting the afterlife abodes of pharaohs, yet they found themselves stiffed on payday. Imagine expecting a paycheck and getting a handful of sand instead. Not exactly a morale booster. Deir el-Medina was a village of skilled workers who lived to ensure that the pharaohs would travel to the underworld in style. They were like the rock stars of the ancient world, minus the groupies and electric guitars. But when payment delays hit, these artisans did something that would resonate through history. They downed tools and staged a sit-in. It was the first recorded labor strike, and it went down in 1159 BC. Their gripe: wages were overdue, and they were tired of empty promises. Ramses Roman III had to juggle the situation like an Egyptian circus act. On the one hand, he needed these workers to keep chiseling away at his legacy. On the other, he couldn't just conjure up gold out of thin air. So, he did what any shrewd ruler would do. He negotiated. The strike was settled, but it was a stark reminder that even pharaohs had to deal with real-world problems. You could say Ramses learned the hard way that you can't build a pyramid without paying the bricklayers. And while we're on the topic of economics, let's not forget the taxes. Ramses was meticulous about tax collection, which, let's be honest, was about as popular then as it is now. The taxes were the engine oil of the ancient state, keeping the wheels of government turning. They funded everything from military campaigns to those dazzling temple complexes. And Ramses, with his eye on the books, made sure that the treasury was never running on empty, even if it meant squeezing the occasional drop of wine from the vineyards of the Nile Delta. So, was Ramses Roman III a legendary king with a Midas touch, or was he just a really good accountant? Well, maybe a bit of both. He understood that the glory of a pharaoh wasn't just carved in stone. It was written in the ledgers of history. The tombs and temples may have been grand, but they were built on a foundation of economic savvy and political acumen. Yet, as Ramses continued to build his legacy brick by brick, the challenges kept coming. His reign was marked by both triumphs and tribulations, and the balance of power was as delicate as the papyrus scrolls that recorded his story. Ramses Roman III stood as a testament to the complexity of leadership in an ancient world where the line between myth and reality was as blurred as the horizon on a hot desert day. And so, his story marches on, not in a straight line, but in a series of twists and turns that would rival any epic saga. Because let's face it, nothing in history is ever as simple as it seems. The tale of Ramses Roman III is far from over, and as the sands of time continue to shift, his legacy remains a beacon of resilience and cunning in a world that was as unforgiving as it was awe-inspiring. Stay tuned. There's more to unravel in the life of this pharaoh who dared to dream big and live even bigger. As Ramses Roman III continued to weave his legacy into the very fabric of Egyptian history, the distant rumblings of conflict echoed once more across the sands. While the sea peoples had been sent packing with a swift kick in the toga, another threat loomed on the horizon, as predictable as a Nile flood, but far less welcome. The Libyans, those perennial gatecrashers of Egypt's borders, were eyeing the fertile lands of the Nile Delta with all the subtlety of a cat eyeing a canary. Enter Ramses Roman III, strapping on his metaphorical armor once again. Imagine a pharaoh whose battle gear was as much about style as it was about survival. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of power dressing. Ramses wasn't about to let some desert nomads waltz into his backyard without a proper welcome, one that involved more spears than handshakes. The year was 1180 BC, and Ramses was ready to teach the Libyans a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. The Libyan invasions were no small skirmishes. These were full-blown assaults, with hundreds of warriors marching under the banner of conquest. Their leader, Mayai, was as ambitious as he was audacious, dreaming of a Libyan renaissance at Egypt's expense. But Ramses, never one to back down from a fight, marshaled his forces for a confrontation that would go down in the annals of history. The Battle of Persia was where Ramses Roman III truly flexed his military muscles. To say the Egyptians were ready would be an understatement. Ramses had prepared his troops with the precision of a drill sergeant, ensuring that every spear, chariot, and bow was in top condition. The Egyptians met the Libyan forces with a ferocity that would make a lioness on the hunt look like a house cat. Ramses, leading from the front, was a sight to behold, a pharaoh who knew that the best way to inspire his troops was to fight alongside them, and fight he did. The battle was brutal and bloody, the kind of clash that makes one question the sanity of those who romanticize warfare. Ramses claimed a decisive victory, and the Libyans were sent scurrying back to their desert camps with their tails between their legs, or so the official line went. In truth, the battle was less of a knockout punch and more of a slogging match, with Ramses' troops eventually wearing down the Libyan forces through sheer determination and superior numbers. Yet the victory was not without its costs. The Egyptian army, though triumphant, was not unscathed. Casualties piled up like papyrus scrolls in a scribe's study, and the treasury took a hit that would make any accountant cringe. War, after all, is an expensive business, and maintaining a standing army was no small feat. For Ramses, the victory was as much a testament to his resilience as it was a reminder of the heavy price of power. Now, here's where Ramses' penchant for storytelling kicks into high gear. The pharaoh, ever the master of spin, ensured that his victory was immortalized in grand style. Inscriptions and reliefs depicted Ramses as a warrior king, standing triumphantly over a sea of vanquished foes. The reality was a bit more nuanced, with logistical nightmares and strategic blunders aplenty. But hey, why let facts get in the way of a good story? Ramses' PR machine went into overdrive, painting him as the savior of Egypt, a leader who could fend off any invader with a flick of his wrist and a glint in his eye. The truth was, Ramses was as much a politician as he was a warrior, understanding that perception was as crucial as reality in maintaining his grip on power. He knew that in the Game of Thrones, appearances were everything. Yet, not every tale from Ramses' reign was spun from whole cloth. His ability to repel the Libyans was, in many ways, a testament to his strategic acumen. Ramses understood the importance of maintaining strong borders, not just as a line of defense, but as a symbol of stability. He fortified Egypt's frontiers with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that would make a Swiss watchmaker proud. But let's not get too carried away with the heroics. While Ramses may have been a skilled strategist, he was also a man who knew how to embellish a tale. His inscriptions often read like the ancient world's version of a blockbuster movie poster, complete with larger-than-life portrayals of his exploits. The line between fact and fiction was as blurred as a desert mirage, leaving historians to sift through the sands of time in search of the truth. Despite the embellishments, Ramses' Roman III reign was one of relative stability, a rare commodity in a world rife with upheaval. His ability to fend off external threats while managing the internal machinations of the court was nothing short of remarkable. Yet, under the surface, the cracks in the facade of his rule were beginning to show. As Ramses basked in the glow of his military triumphs, the economic strains of constant warfare began to take their toll. The treasury, already stretched thin, groaned under the weight of military expenditures and public works. The cost of maintaining Egypt's military machine, combined with the necessity of keeping the populace fed and content, was a juggling act that required all of Ramses' considerable skill. In the end, Ramses' Roman III legacy was a complex tapestry of triumph and tribulation, woven together with threads of myth and reality. His reign was a testament to the power of leadership, the art of spin, and the delicate balance of keeping an empire from toppling under its own weight. As Ramses stood at the helm of his kingdom, he knew that the sands of time were ever shifting, and the next challenge was never far away. But that's a tale for another day, as the life of Ramses Roman III continues to unfold with all the drama, intrigue, and spectacle of a true epic saga. Stay tuned, for the story of this indomitable pharaoh is far from over. As Ramses Roman III navigated the turbulent waters of ancient Egyptian politics, little did he know that his greatest threat wasn't from beyond Egypt's borders, but rather from within the very walls of his lavish palace. Enter the harem conspiracy of 1155 BC, a plot so juicy it makes modern soap operas look like kids' bedtime stories. If you thought palace intrigues were just the stuff of fiction, Ramses' tale will have you thinking twice. This was the real deal, complete with betrayal, ambition, and courtroom drama that would make Shakespeare nod in approval. The conspiracy was an internal affair, hatched not by foreign enemies, but by those closest to Ramses. It was like finding out your own family had been plotting behind your back, only instead of stealing your Netflix password, they were after the throne. The chief architect of this cloak and dagger affair was none other than one of Ramses' secondary wives, Ti. Now, let's get one thing straight. In the harem, secondary didn't mean unimportant. Ti was a woman with ambition sharper than a scorpion's sting, and she had her eyes set on securing the throne for her son, Pentuer. The plan was elaborate, the stuff of thrillers. Ti, alongside a motley crew of co-conspirators including harem officials, palace guards, and even a baker, because who doesn't want a pastry chef on their team, aimed to depose Ramses and place Pentuer on the throne. It was a classic power grab, and it nearly worked. The key to their scheme lay in timing and secrecy, two commodities as rare in the palace as rain in the desert. Ti and her associates plotted in whispers, careful to avoid the ever-watchful eyes of Ramses' loyalists. But as history often teaches us, the best-laid plans of mice and conspirators often go awry. The plot unraveled when a member of the inner circle got cold feet and spilled the beans faster than you can say betrayal. Ramses, upon discovering the conspiracy, must have felt like he'd been hit by a chariot. The betrayal was personal, a dagger to the heart from those he trusted. But Ramses was nothing if not decisive. He quickly rounded up the conspirators, and what followed was an ancient courtroom drama that could give any modern legal series a run for its money. The trials were meticulously recorded in the judicial papyrus of Turin, a document that reads like a transcript of a particularly gripping episode of Law and Order. Ancient Egypt. The trials were public spectacles, held to ensure that justice was not only done, but seen to be done. The conspirators, including Ti, were brought before a panel of judges, men who were likely well aware of the stakes involved. The charges were laid bare, and the evidence was as damning as a hieroglyphic confession. Witnesses testified, and the accused were given the chance to speak in their defense, though their pleas fell on deaf ears. The verdicts were swift and brutal. Execution was the order of the day for most of the conspirators, a fate that was as final as it was inevitable. Pentuer, Ti's ambitious son, was given an option that was less about mercy and more about saving face, suicide, a grim end for a prince who reached too far. The trials concluded with a series of executions that served as a stark warning to anyone else nursing ambitions of toppling a pharaoh. So, what drove Ti and her co-conspirators to such lengths? Answer lies in the complex web of harem politics and the precarious nature of power in ancient Egypt. The harem was more than just a place of luxury and leisure. It was a political arena where the stakes were as high as the pyramids themselves. Secondary wives like Ti were constantly vying for influence, and securing the throne for their offspring was the ultimate prize. It was a high-risk, high-reward game, and for Ti, the gamble ended in disaster. Economically, the conspiracy and its aftermath were no small matter. The trials and executions were costly affairs, both in terms of resources and the political capital spent to maintain stability. But Ramses, ever the shrewd ruler, understood the importance of demonstrating that no one, not even those within his own household, was above the law. It was a message as clear as the Nile on a cloudless day. Betray the pharaoh, and you pay the price. The harem conspiracy also shines a light on the darker realities of Ramses' reign. While his victories on the battlefield and his grand architectural projects painted a picture of strength and stability, the truth was that his rule was as susceptible to internal strife as any other. The conspiracy exposed the vulnerabilities of a system where power was concentrated in the hands of a few, and where personal ambitions could threaten the very fabric of the state. Yet, even amid the chaos and betrayal, Ramses managed to hold the kingdom together, a testament to his resilience and political acumen. He emerged from the conspiracy with his authority intact, though not without scars. The episode served as a reminder that even the mightiest of pharaohs could be brought low by the machinations of those closest to them. The harem conspiracy is a tale of ambition, betrayal, and the harsh realities of power, a story that resonates even today. It's a reminder that history, with all its twists and turns, is as much about the human experience as it is about grand narratives and sweeping events. As Ramses III continued to rule, the echoes of the conspiracy lingered, a shadow over his reign and a cautionary tale for those who would follow in his footsteps. And so, the saga of Ramses III marches on, a complex interplay of triumph and tragedy, power and peril. His story is far from over, with more chapters waiting to unfold. As we continue to unravel the life of this remarkable pharaoh, one thing is certain. Ramses III was a ruler whose legacy was as enduring as the monuments he left behind, a testament to the enduring struggle between ambition and duty in the annals of history. Stay tuned, for the tale of Ramses III is a journey not to be missed. Ramses III reign, like a blockbuster sequel, had its highs and lows, with plenty of drama to keep the audience hooked till the credits rolled. But as our tale winds down, let's zoom out and see what Ramses left behind besides a trail of defeated foes and a courtroom drama that would make the real housewives look tame. Spoiler, it's a mixed bag, with splendor on one side and some serious economic headaches on the other. First off, let's talk monumental architecture. Ramses III was no stranger to the art of building big. His architectural legacy is a testament to his ambitions, with the Medinet Habu Temple standing as his piece de resistance. This temple complex, sprawling over 66,000 square meters, was more than just a place of worship. It was a statement. Picture a stone billboard screaming, "Ramses was here." Its walls are adorned with vivid reliefs depicting Ramses' victories, including the famous scenes of the Sea People's defeat. Think of it as an ancient Instagram feed, curated to highlight his greatest hits. But these grand constructions came with a price tag that would make a modern real estate mogul raise an eyebrow. The resources poured into these projects were immense, and not just in terms of stone and labor. The economic strain was palpable, with the treasury groaning under the weight of continual military campaigns and building projects. This wasn't just a case of build it, and they will come. It was more like build it, and hope you don't bankrupt the kingdom. Here's the kicker. While Ramses' monuments were built to last, his economic policies weren't exactly built on bedrock. The lavish spending on temples and military exploits left Egypt's economy as fragile as a sandcastle at high tide. Inflation reared its ugly head, and grain, a staple as crucial as air in ancient Egypt, became a barometer of economic health. A rapid increase in grain prices hinted at underlying fiscal issues, ones that even the divine favor couldn't fix. Ramses' reign was also marked by a series of natural disasters that would test even the most resilient of rulers. The famous Year of the Hyena, around 1159 BC, saw a climatic downturn that led to famine and unrest. It's the kind of irony history loves. Here you have a pharaoh whose monumental achievements were overshadowed by the very forces of nature he couldn't control. The economic impact was severe, and Ramses found himself juggling more than just the affairs of state. He was trying to keep the very fabric of society from unraveling. So, was Ramses Roman III a master of spin, or did he genuinely earn his status as one of Egypt's greats? The answer, like any good historical narrative, is a bit of both. Ramses was undoubtedly skilled at crafting an image of unassailable power. His victories were chronicled with the flair of a Hollywood blockbuster, ensuring that his legacy was as polished as the Karnak temple's gleaming columns. Yet beneath the surface, the reality was far more complex. His PR campaign masked the cracks in the empire, much like a fresh coat of paint on a crumbling wall. The Medinet Habu inscriptions, for all their grandeur, were as much about controlling the narrative as they were about celebrating victory. Ramses knew that the perception of power was often more important than the power itself. After all, if you can convince people you're invincible, half the battle is already won. But here's the twist. Ramses' reputation as a great pharaoh wasn't just a product of propaganda. His military successes, particularly against the Sea Peoples and Libyans, were genuine triumphs that secured Egypt's borders and stabilized the region during a time of upheaval. His ability to repel invasions and maintain a semblance of order amid chaos was no small feat. It was a testament to his strategic acumen, even if his economic policies left something to be desired. In the end, Ramses Roman III was a paradox, a ruler who could build towering monuments while his economy teetered on the brink, a king whose victories were as much about spectacle as they were about substance. His legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of grandeur and grit, a reminder that history is never black and white, but painted in shades of grey. As we wrap up the saga of Ramses Roman III, it's worth pondering the nature of legacy itself. Is it the monuments we leave behind, the stories we tell, or the realities we choose to ignore? Ramses' life was a balancing act, a dance between myth and reality, power and perception. He managed to juggle it all with the grace of a pharaoh, or at least without losing his head, literally or figuratively. And so, Ramses Roman III stands as a figure both celebrated and scrutinized, a testament to the complexities of leadership in a world where the sands of time are ever shifting. His story, like those carved into the walls of Medinet Habu, endures, a narrative as enduring as the monuments he left behind. As we close the book on Ramses Roman III, we are reminded that history, much like the pharaoh himself, is a grand tale of triumphs and tribulations, one that continues to captivate and confound as it unfolds through the ages. In the gritty cobblestone jungle of 2nd century BCE Rome, where power suits weren't a thing, but togas were all the rage, the political arena was a gladiatorial spectacle of its own. Picture a bustling city, not just with the chaos of chariots and market stalls, but with political intrigue thicker than a bowl of garum. The Roman Republic was the stage, and boy, was there drama. The air was teeming with the scent of ambition, the clamor of oratory, and the subtle stench of corruption wafting through the Senate halls. Here, politics wasn't just a job, it was a blood sport, often literally. Now, the Roman Republic was a complex beast. At its heart was the Senate, a collection of Rome's most elite, who operated under the charming illusion that they were the custodians of Rome's glorious destiny. The Senate was a bit like an exclusive club. Think of a very posh country club, where the entry requirement involved a family tree as tangled as a Mediterranean vine, and a bank account that could rival the hoard of a dragon. These noblemen, numbering around 300 or so in Gaius, Gracchus's time, wielded considerable power over the Republic's affairs, whether it was declaring war, doling out funds, or deciding the fates of lesser mortals. But let's not forget the tribunes of the plebs, the people's champions, or at least that was the idea. These were officials elected by the plebeians, the common folk of Rome, who had the power to veto actions by the Senate that they found disagreeable. Imagine them as the whistleblowers or the stop signs on the Senate's highway of unchecked authority. However, navigating this political minefield was no easy task, and it certainly wasn't for the faint-hearted or those with a weak constitution. Yet, as with any great power structure, there were cracks. Economic inequality was as rampant in Rome as olives in an Italian salad. The rich were getting richer. Amassing land like it was the latest fashion trend, while the poorer citizens were left scratching their heads and wondering where their piece of the pie had vanished. The problem of land distribution was like a bad rash that just wouldn't go away. It was a source of endless frustration for those who weren't born with a silver spoon. And then there was the social side. Rome was a melting pot of cultures, and not in the let's all get along sort of way. It was more of a pressure cooker, and everyone was feeling the heat. Slaves were pouring in from Rome's many conquests, making up roughly a third of the population by some estimates, and their labor was cheap, undercutting the average Roman citizen trying to make an honest living. It was the kind of inequality that would make even the most hardened CEO blush. Enter the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, two figures who would stir Rome's political pot like never before. But today, we're setting the stage for Gaius, the younger of the two, whose political reforms would leave an enduring mark on Roman history. Gaius was the kind of guy who would have made a great modern-day politician, charismatic, persuasive, and with a flair for the dramatic. But before he could make his mark, he had to navigate the political landscape that was as treacherous as it was fascinating. The Senate wasn't the only player in town. The Roman political structure was a labyrinth of offices and magistrates, each with its own role. There were consuls, praetors, aediles, and quaestors, not to mention the censors, who were more concerned about the moral fiber of the citizenry than their own questionable ethics. It was a system that was supposed to keep everything in check, but more often than not, it felt like juggling flaming swords on a tightrope over a pit of crocodiles. In this world, political alliances were as fleeting as the Roman summer, and betrayal was as common as a good glass of wine. With Rome's expansion came new challenges, and the political system struggled to keep up. The Republic was a bit like an old ship, creaking under the weight of its own empire, desperately in need of repair, but with nobody wanting to be the one to actually fix it. Amidst this chaos, Gaius Gracchus would soon emerge as a fiery tribune, taking up the mantle of reform where his brother Tiberius had left off. But before Gaius could step into the limelight, the stage had to be set, and the political players had to take their positions. The Senate was wary, the tribunes were restless, and the populace was hungry for change, or at least for more grain. The Republic was at a crossroads, teetering on the brink of change. Economic strife, social inequality, and political discontent were brewing a storm that no legion could march against. And amid this tempest, Gaius Gracchus would stride onto the stage, ready to challenge the status quo with reforms that would shake the very foundations of Rome. But that, dear listener, is a tale for another time. For now, we rest with the knowledge that the world of ancient Rome, for all its grandeur and glory, was as messy and complicated as any modern political drama. As the storm of change gathered over the Roman Republic, Gaius Gracchus was preparing to step into the political ring with the kind of enthusiasm that could only be matched by a gladiator stepping into the Colosseum, hoping to avoid a lion's lunch. But Gaius wasn't just any political upstart. He was a Gracchus, and that name came with a heavy, storied legacy. His older brother, Tiberius Gracchus, had already blazed a controversial trail through Roman politics, leaving a legacy that was as inspiring as it was tragic. Tiberius, the elder brother, was a man of vision, or at least that's what his supporters would tell you. In reality, he was the kind of guy who'd look at a broken system and think, why not shake this up a bit? His land reform bill, aimed at redistributing the vast estates hoarded by the Roman elite to the landless citizens, was more revolutionary than a toga party without wine. In a world where the top 1% of landowners owned most of the arable land, Tiberius's proposal was as welcome as a toga malfunction at a senatorial banquet. However, Tiberius's bold moves were not without consequences. In a political system where change was as sluggish as a Roman tortoise, Tiberius's reforms were met with fierce resistance. His sudden death, assassinated in a violent brawl, allegedly orchestrated by senators who preferred their estates unperturbed, served as a grim reminder of what happened to those who dared to challenge the status quo. Gaius, watching his brother's fate unfold, would have been forgiven for backing away from the political scene altogether. But instead, Tiberius's fate lit a fire within him, a determination to continue the fight for reform. Now, let's talk about the formidable woman behind the Gracchus brothers, Cornelia, their mother. If there were a hall of fame for ancient Roman mothers, Cornelia would have a statue front and center. Daughter of the great Roman general Scipio Africanus, she had political savvy flowing through her veins. Cornelia was a widow who had turned down a marriage proposal from the Egyptian king Ptolemy Roman VIII to focus on raising her sons, and rumor has it, probably because she'd rather deal with Roman politics than Egyptian royalty. Her influence on her sons was as deep as the Roman catacombs. She instilled in them a sense of duty and an understanding of Rome's social issues, the kind of grounding that would fuel Gaius's political passions. Armed with his mother's wisdom and his brother's legacy, Gaius Gracchus entered the political arena as a tribune of the plebs in 123 BCE. He was a man on a mission, ready to tackle the rampant economic inequality that plagued Rome like an unending plague of locusts. His approach was comprehensive, targeting multiple facets of Roman society with the kind of detail-oriented strategy that would make a modern project manager weep with joy. First up on Gaius's reform agenda was the grain supply. The grain dole in Rome was a logistical nightmare, akin to trying to organize a toga party for 1,000 people with only 1 amphora of wine. Grain was the staple of the Roman diet, and its supply, or lack thereof, was a matter of life and death for the average citizen. Gaius proposed a law that would provide grain at a fixed, subsidized price to Roman citizens. This wasn't just a generous handout, it was a calculated move to stabilize the volatile grain market and prevent the kind of bread riots that would make Marie Antoinette's "let them eat cake" moment seem like a minor faux pas. The cost of this grain subsidy was significant, estimated at around 5 denarii per modius, a Roman measure roughly equivalent to 9 liters. To put that into perspective, this was a time when a skilled laborer might earn about 3 denarii a day. It was an ambitious proposal, requiring the reallocation of state funds and a whole lot of political maneuvering. But Gaius wasn't just throwing denarii around like confetti. He had a plan. By stabilizing the grain supply, he aimed to alleviate immediate hunger while also securing the support of the urban plebeians, an essential move for any aspiring political reformer. Land reform was next on his checklist. Tiberius had already sown the seeds of this contentious issue, but Gaius was determined to see it through. He proposed the establishment of new colonies in Italy and abroad where landless Romans could settle, a sort of ancient Roman version of Go West, young man. These colonies were not just a means of redistributing land. They were also strategic outposts that would help secure Roman territory. The logistics of such a plan were as complex as a senator's tax declaration, requiring the coordination of surveying, allocation, and the actual settlement of citizens. Yet, Gaius was undeterred, driven by the vision of a more equitable Rome. In addition to grain and land reforms, Gaius also tackled the judicial system. He introduced a law that transferred the control of the courts from the Senate to the equestrian order, Rome's wealthy but politically sidelined class. This was a shrewd move, designed to curb the Senate's unchecked power and bring a fresh perspective to the judiciary. The equestrians, often merchants and businessmen, were more likely to be sympathetic to Gaius's reforms, and their involvement in the courts was intended to ensure fairer trials for the common people. The Senate, predictably, was about as thrilled with Gaius's reforms as a cat in a rainstorm. They saw him as a threat to their entrenched privileges, a political maverick who dared to challenge their near monopoly on power. Yet, Gaius's charisma and eloquence won him a significant following among the Roman populace. His speeches were legendary, filled with the kind of rhetorical flourishes that would make a modern-day TED talk seem like a bedtime story. Gaius's early political career was marked by a series of strategic moves designed to build a broad base of support. He forged alliances with various factions, from the equestrians to the urban poor, creating a coalition that was as diverse as it was powerful. His reforms were not just about addressing immediate issues. They were about laying the groundwork for a more balanced and just society. It was a Herculean task, and Gaius approached it with the determination of a man who had nothing to lose, or perhaps everything to gain. As Gaius's political star rose, so did the tensions in Rome. His reforms were shaking the very foundations of the Republic, challenging the status quo in ways that were both revolutionary and, to some, terrifying. The Senate was plotting, the people were watching, and the future of Rome hung in the balance. But for Gaius Gracchus, this was just the beginning. His journey was far from over, and the challenges ahead would test his resolve in ways he could never have imagined. Yet, as history would show, Gaius was not a man to back down easily. His legacy was still in the making, and the Republic was about to find out just how far one man could go in the pursuit of change. And so, as the Roman streets buzzed with the latest Gaius gossip, our daring tribune was busy crafting reforms with the precision of a Roman engineer building an aqueduct. Let's dive into the Lex Frumentaria, a piece of legislation that, at its core, was about as revolutionary as a smartphone upgrade in the tech world. It promised big changes, but not without its fair share of glitches. The Lex Frumentaria was Gaius's answer to the perennial problem of hangry Romans. He proposed a grain dole, providing wheat at a fixed, subsidized price to citizens, kind of like a food bank with a side of political strategy. The idea was to curb the kind of food insecurity that could turn Rome's plebeians into a mob faster than you could say, Ave Caesar. For a bit of context, at around 6/1/3 asses per modius, it was a sweet deal when you consider that a loaf of bread could cost about 2 asses. The subsidy was no small feat. It required Rome to dip into its coffers like a teenager with a new credit card. The financial implications were immense. This wasn't just about feeding people. It was a masterstroke in political chess, ensuring Gaius remained in the good graces of the urban poor. It also became a logistical nightmare for the Senate, who now had to find the funds to support this culinary generosity. Think of it as Rome's version of a stimulus package, only with more toga-clad debates and less paperwork. But the Senate was not amused. Imagine a room full of senators, robes hiked up in indignation, balking at the very notion of appeasing the masses at their expense. The Lex Frumentaria was seen as an affront to their authority, a power grab that threatened their grip on Rome's purse strings. In the opinion of the senators, Gaius was playing politics with Rome's economy like a kid with a new toy, and they were not ready to let him get away with it. In parallel, Gaius introduced the Lex Militaris, a reform aimed at improving the lot of Roman soldiers. Picture this. Roman soldiers were expected to supply their own gear, like asking a firefighter to bring their own hose to a blaze. The Lex Militaris sought to end this absurdity by providing state-sponsored equipment and reducing the minimum age for military service. This was Gaius's way of ensuring that Rome's legions were well equipped without bankrupting the average legionnaire. It was a savvy move to secure the loyalty of the military, which, as any aspiring political leader knows, is a handy ally when the going gets tough. Yet, the Senate saw these reforms as a Trojan horse, cleverly disguised as benevolent policy. They feared Gaius's growing influence, worried that his popularity might one day lead to a dictatorship, a concept that, ironically, was centuries away from being realized in the form of an actual dictator. The Senate's resistance was as predictable as a Roman bathhouse scandal, and they worked tirelessly to undermine Gaius's initiatives. The opposition came not just in whispers and backroom deals, but also in full-fledged political maneuvering. Enter the senator's secret weapon, the veto. Tribunes who were more aligned with the Senate than the plebeians could veto Gaius's proposals, a tactic akin to a bureaucratic, "No, you can't." It was a cat-and-mouse game, with Gaius forced to strategize around these legal roadblocks like a master general leading troops through hostile territory. Primary sources of the time, such as Plutarch and Appian, paint a vivid picture of the Senate's disdain for Gaius. They describe a political climate where the Senate often dismissed Gracchus's reforms as populist pandering. The Senate's accusations were less about policy and more about power, as they feared Gaius's rise could unseat their cushy positions. In modern terms, imagine a boardroom of executives panicking as a charismatic startup founder threatens to disrupt their industry. Despite the Senate's machinations, Gaius's reforms were not without their supporters. The equestrians, Rome's wealthy merchant class often sided with Gaius, seeing in him a champion for their interests. By shifting court control from the Senate to the equestrians, Gaius had effectively bought himself a buffer against the Senate's legal assaults. This move, akin to appointing your own legal team in a corporate lawsuit, was a brilliant stroke of political maneuvering. The Senate, however, wasn't about to roll over. They countered Gaius's reforms with their own proposals, seeking to win back the favor of the people. They tried to outbid Gaius's generosity with grain distributions of their own, a tactic that could be likened to a political version of anything you can do, I can do better. It was a desperate attempt to claw back control, but the damage was done. Gaius had captured the imagination of the Roman populace, and the Senate was left scrambling to contain his influence. Amidst this political tug-of-war, Gaius's personal life wasn't exactly a stroll in the Roman Forum, either. His marriage to Licinia, an influential woman in her own right, was part and parcel of his political strategy. In Roman society, where alliances were as crucial as the aqueducts, Gaius's marriage was as much about politics as it was about love. Together, they were a power couple that could rival any modern political duo. Gaius's reforms were not just about addressing Rome's immediate issues, they were about reshaping the Republic's future. The Lex Frumentaria and Lex Militaris were bold steps towards a more equitable society, but they also exposed the deep divisions within Roman politics. Gaius's initiatives were both celebrated and vilified, a testament to their controversial nature. As the political arena heated up, Gaius was left juggling reforms like a circus performer with too many flaming torches. The Senate's resistance was fierce, but Gaius's resolve was unyielding. He pushed forward, driven by the belief that Rome could be better, that the Republic could rise above its internal squabbles and embrace a new era of fairness and equality. Yet, as history teaches us, change is never easy. The path Gaius chose was fraught with challenges, and while he had allies, he also had formidable enemies. The Senate's opposition was relentless, and the political landscape was shifting beneath Gaius's feet. But even as the storm clouds gathered, Gaius remained steadfast, determined to see his vision through to the end. The tale of Gaius Gracchus is far from over. As his reforms unfolded, they set the stage for even greater upheaval in Rome. The Senate, the people, and Gaius himself were all players in a grand drama that would reshape the very foundations of the Republic. The stakes were high, and the outcome uncertain, but one thing was clear. Gaius Gracchus was not a man who would go quietly into history. Stay tuned, because this political saga has more twists and turns than a Roman chariot race, and the next chapter promises to be just as thrilling. The battle for Rome's soul was only beginning, and Gaius Gracchus was right at the heart of it, a beacon of reform in a world resistant to change. And so, as the battle for Rome's soul continued to rage with all the subtlety of an elephant in a pottery shop, Gaius Gracchus found himself in the eye of the storm. The political climate was about as stable as a Roman chariot on a cobblestone street, bumpy, chaotic, and prone to spectacular crashes. The Senate, in their toga-twisting wisdom, had decided that Gaius and his reforms were a threat that needed dealing with. And by dealing with, I mean they were plotting his downfall with the kind of fervor usually reserved for gladiatorial contests. The Senate's strategy was a masterclass in political skullduggery. They launched a counteroffensive with a new plan: divide and conquer. The senators started offering their own reforms, which were about as sincere as a 3 denarii coin. These counterforms were designed to peel away Gaius's support base like layers of a stubborn onion. They promised land, grain, and even a few tax breaks to the plebeians, hoping to lure them away from the Gracchus camp. Of course, these offers came with more strings attached than a Roman lyre, but in the cutthroat world of Roman politics, it was enough to sow doubt and discord. As if that wasn't enough, the Senate also employed a little character assassination, Rome style. They accused Gaius of aiming for dictatorial power, a rich accusation coming from a group that ran the Republic like their personal fiefdom. The senators whispered into the ears of the urban plebs, painting Gaius as a demagogue who would lead them into ruin. It was the ancient equivalent of a smear campaign, complete with innuendo and half-truths that would make any modern spin doctor proud. The political tension soon exploded into outright violence, a grim harbinger of things to come in Rome's tumultuous future. The streets of the city became a battleground, with clashes between Gaius's supporters and those loyal to the Senate becoming alarmingly frequent. These weren't your typical bar brawls. They were full-scale melees with clubs, stones, and the occasional sword thrown in for good measure. It was as if the Roman Forum had morphed into an arena, and this time the combatants weren't professional gladiators, but citizens fighting for their future. Gaius, ever the political tactician, didn't take this lying down. He launched a campaign to regain control, aiming to secure a third term as tribune, a political move that was as audacious as a senator caught in a toga scandal. Traditionally, holding the position of tribune for more than 2 consecutive terms was frowned upon, much like wearing sandals with socks. Yet, Gaius knew that without the power of the tribunate, his reforms would be as vulnerable as a toga in a windstorm. But securing that third term was easier said than done. The Senate wasn't just sitting around sipping wine and plotting his downfall. They were actively working to ensure that Gaius's political career would be shorter than a Roman summer. They backed rival candidates with all the subtlety of a stage 5 clinger, hoping to fracture Gaius's support and keep him out of power. Despite these challenges, Gaius refused to throw in the toga. He doubled down on his efforts, organizing rallies and public gatherings to drum up support. His oratory skills were legendary, and he used them to full effect, delivering speeches that could stir even the most apathetic Roman to action. He spoke passionately about his vision for Rome, a city where the elite didn't hold all the cards, and where the average citizen had a shot at a better life. As the election drew near, the tension in Rome reached a fever pitch. The political atmosphere was thick with anticipation, and the smell of sweat from too many bodies crammed into the forum. Gaius's supporters were fired up, ready to back their champion to the bitter end. Yet, as the votes were counted, it became clear that the Senate's machinations had worked. Gaius had been outmaneuvered, his bid for a third term thwarted by a combination of political cunning and sheer ruthlessness. But if the Senate thought they had seen the last of Gaius, they were sorely mistaken. Like a Roman cat with 9 lives, Gaius wasn't ready to exit stage left just yet. He regrouped with his allies, determined to continue the fight from outside the official channels of power. This was the kind of resilience that made legends, or got you killed in the rough-and-tumble world of Roman politics. Meanwhile, the Senate, basking in their temporary victory, began to tighten the screws. They passed new laws to curb the power of the tribunes, effectively clipping the wings of any future reformers inspired by Gaius's vision. It was a classic case of locking the stable door after the horse has bolted, but it served as a reminder of the Senate's determination to maintain their stranglehold on power. Gaius, undeterred, took his fight to the people. He organized protests, rallies, and even the occasional riot, determined to keep his vision alive. His supporters, loyal to the end, followed him with the kind of devotion usually reserved for cult leaders or particularly charismatic generals. They believed in Gaius's dream of a Rome where the playing field was more level, and they were willing to risk everything to see it realized. Yet, as the political temperature continued to rise, Gaius's position became increasingly precarious. The Senate, eager to be rid of this troublesome reformer once and for all, plotted a final showdown. They passed a decree known as the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, effectively declaring martial law and giving the consuls the authority to do whatever was necessary to maintain order. To Gaius, this was nothing less than a declaration of war. He rallied his supporters, urging them to stand their ground and resist the Senate's tyranny. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the future of Rome and seal Gaius's fate. The final showdown came to a head on the Aventine Hill, a dramatic setting befitting the climax of this political saga. Gaius and his followers had gathered there, determined to make a stand against the Senate's forces. It was a tense standoff, with both sides glaring at each other across the hill, their fates hanging in the balance. In the end, it was violence that broke the standoff, a grim reminder of the brutal realities of Roman politics. The Senate's forces, fearing the consequences of inaction, attacked with a ferocity that left Gaius's supporters reeling. The ensuing battle was bloody and chaotic, with cries of anguish mingling with the clash of weapons. In the midst of the carnage, Gaius Gracchus met his end, slain by the very forces he had sought to reform. The death of Gaius Gracchus marked the end of an era, but it was far from the end of Rome's political turmoil. His legacy, like that of his brother Tiberius, would live on, inspiring future generations of reformers and revolutionaries. The Senate, for all their machinations, had only temporarily stemmed the tide of change. The seeds of discontent sown by the Gracchi would continue to grow, eventually transforming the Roman Republic in ways that no one could have predicted. Yet, as the dust settled on the Aventine Hill, one thing was clear. Rome had lost one of its most passionate and visionary reformers. Gaius Gracchus had dared to challenge the status quo, and though he had paid the ultimate price, his dream of a more equitable Rome would echo through the ages, a testament to the power of one man's vision to change the world. And so, as we leave Gaius Gracchus on the pages of history, we are reminded that the struggle for justice and equality is as old as time itself. In Rome, as in the world today, the battle for a better future is never truly over. The legacy of Gaius Gracchus lives on, a beacon of hope and a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one person can make a difference. Stay tuned, because the story of Rome is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be just as riveting. As we close the curtain on Gaius Gracchus's tumultuous tale, it's tempting to romanticize his story as one of noble sacrifice for the common good, a David versus Goliath narrative with a toga-clad hero. But let's not get swept away by the allure of myth. There's a gritty reality lurking beneath the surface of those marble busts. Gaius's reforms, while revolutionary, were not the panacea for Rome's deep-rooted problems, nor were they solely altruistic. They were a cocktail of genuine concern for Rome's underprivileged, political maneuvering, and let's be honest, a healthy dose of personal ambition. So, what was the aftermath of Gaius Gracchus's reforms? Did they leave Rome a utopia of equity and justice? Not quite. The grain dole, for instance, became a permanent fixture in Roman life, a populist tool wielded by politicians like a Roman gladiator brandishing a sword. It was the ancient world's equivalent of a welfare state, ensuring that the urban poor remained fed and, more importantly, pacified. But this wasn't just about bread. It was about power dynamics. The grain dole was an ingenious way to maintain social order, a means for the elite to keep the plebeians content and, crucially, out of the streets. The land reforms, on the other hand, met with mixed results. While the idea of redistributing land to the landless was as appealing as free wine at a Roman banquet, implementation proved tricky. The Senate, those crafty custodians of the status quo, managed to stall and eventually dilute the reforms. The promise of new colonies was overshadowed by bureaucratic inertia and opposition from landowners who guarded their estates like Cerberus at the gates of Hades. The initial enthusiasm waned, leaving many of the landless still dreaming of their patch of Roman soil. Yet, despite these setbacks, Gaius's reforms did plant seeds of change in the Roman political landscape. They exposed the limitations of the republic system, revealing how ill-equipped it was to address the needs of an expanding empire. The Senate's stubborn resistance to reform highlighted the growing chasm between Rome's elite and its citizens, a divide that would only widen in the years to come. Gaius's attempts to redistribute power, even if only partially successful, laid the groundwork for future reformers who would continue to challenge the Senate's hegemony. Now, let's talk about Gaius's legacy. It's easy to paint him as a tragic hero, a man who dared to dream of a better Rome and paid the ultimate price. But to see Gaius solely through this lens is to ignore the complexity of his character and the messy reality of Roman politics. Yes, he was a visionary, but he was also a shrewd politician who knew how to play the game. His reforms were as much about consolidating his power base as they were about helping the plebeians. In the end, Gaius was a product of his time, a time when the line between self-interest and public service was as blurred as a Roman fresco after a few too many goblets of wine. The myth of Gaius Gracchus is seductive. It tells us of a lone reformer battling against the odds, a story that resonates with our innate desire for justice and fairness. But the reality was far more complex. Gaius was no saint. He was a man navigating a treacherous political landscape, using every tool at his disposal to achieve his goals. His story reminds us that history is rarely black and white, more often a shade of Roman grey. In the grand scheme of things, Gaius's reforms were a catalyst for change, setting the stage for the social and political upheavals that would eventually lead to the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Empire. the seeds of discontent sown by the Gracchi brothers would eventually sprout into full-blown crises, challenging the very foundations of Roman governance. The Republic, creaking under the weight of its own contradictions, would soon be replaced by the autocratic rule of emperors who promised stability in exchange for freedom. But even as the Republic faded into history, the ideals championed by Gaius Gracchus persisted. His vision of a Rome where power was more evenly distributed, where the needs of the many outweighed the privileges of the few, resonated through the ages. Future reformers and revolutionaries would look to Gaius as a symbol of hope and defiance, a reminder that change, though often slow and painful, is always possible. As we wrap up this saga, let's take a moment to reflect on the lessons Gaius's story offers us. It teaches us about the complexities of power and the challenges of reform, about the resilience of those who dare to dream of a better world. It reminds us that history is not just a series of events, but a tapestry woven from the ambitions, struggles, and aspirations of those who came before us. In the end, Gaius Gracchus's legacy is as multifaceted as a Roman mosaic, a blend of triumphs and tragedies that continues to captivate our imagination. His story is a testament to the enduring power of ideas and the indomitable spirit of those who dare to challenge the status quo. So, as you drift off to sleep with these tales of ancient Rome swirling in your mind, remember that the past, much like the present, is filled with complexity, contradiction, and the ever-present possibility of change. And who knows? Perhaps the legacy of Gaius Gracchus will inspire the dreamers and reformers of tomorrow, proving that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one person can indeed make a difference. In the dust-laden halls of 15th century Castile, where power plays were as common as a peasant's bread, a young girl named Isabella was about to embark on a journey that would give even the most convoluted soap operas a run for their money. Born in 1451 in the quaint little town of Madrigal de las Altas Torres, Isabella had no idea she'd end up as one of the most powerful queens in history. After all, she was just a kid from a fractured royal family, which was about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Isabella's early life was a masterclass in medieval chaos. Her father, John Roman II of Castile, was a king more interested in poetry than politics. Seriously, the guy had a soft spot for sonnets. But when he died in 1454, Isabella's half-brother, Henry Roman IV, took the throne. Henry, nicknamed Henry the Impotent. Yeah, they didn't hold back with the nicknames back then, was not exactly what you'd call a decisive leader. His reign was a turbulent mix of indecisive governance and scandal. And in a time when power was as slippery as a greased pig, Isabella was stuck watching from the sidelines. Talk about family drama. Isabella's mother, Isabella of Portugal, wasn't exactly the poster child for mental stability. She reportedly suffered from bouts of insanity, which, given the stress of the times, might have been the only rational response. This meant our young Isabella had to grow up fast, learning to navigate the royal court's treacherous waters while dodging political sharks at every turn. Now, fast forward to 1468, and things are heating up. Henry Roman IV, with his questionable legacy and even more questionable heirs, decided to name Isabella as his successor, bypassing his own daughter. But there's a catch. There's always a catch. Isabella had to marry his choice of suitor. Enter the medieval matchmaking nightmare, Alfonso V of Portugal, a man who might as well have had political porn tattooed on his forehead. But Isabella was nothing if not shrewd. She refused, risking everything, because she had her eye on another prize, Ferdinand of Aragon. And here's where Isabella truly pulled a power move worthy of any modern-day political thriller. Against the odds and without her brother's blessing, she married Ferdinand in 1469. Picture the two of them, a power couple with a combined age of 34, ready to take on the world. Their marriage was a strategic masterpiece, uniting the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon in a partnership that would eventually shape Spain as we know it. Forget Brangelina. This was the original power couple, and they didn't need a tabloid to cement their legacy. But of course, things weren't as romantic as a Hollywood script would suggest. Their marriage contract was as detailed as a modern prenup, outlining everything from political alliances to who got to keep the remote control. Okay, maybe not the remote, but it was intense. They even agreed to rule jointly, a novel concept back then, showcasing Isabella's knack for balancing ambition with practicality. She knew a throne wasn't just taken, it was negotiated, and she was a master negotiator. The political landscape was a minefield, with Isabella having to outmaneuver her own brother's supporters while ensuring her claim to the throne didn't get buried under a pile of court intrigue. And Henry, he was less than thrilled with Isabella's marital defiance, to put it mildly. The ensuing years were a mix of skirmishes, trails, and uneasy truces. By 1474, when Henry Roman IV finally kicked the proverbial bucket, Isabella was ready. She seized the throne of Castile, and not a moment too soon. Her coronation was a statement. No more playing princess. It was time for a queen to rule. So what do we take from this medieval Game of Thrones? Isabella was not just a pawn in a man's world. She was a player who mastered the game. Her early life, filled with adversity and strategic marriages, set the stage for a reign that would redefine a nation. It's a reminder that even in the chaos of history, some people manage to write their own stories, one calculated move at a time. And Isabella, she wrote hers with a quill dipped in pure ambition. From the moment Isabella and Ferdinand said their I do's, it was less of a honeymoon phase and more like a board meeting with a side of romance. Their marriage was a strategic masterstroke, akin to merging two corporate giants to create a monopoly on the Iberian Peninsula. Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon each brought to the table a kingdom that, when combined, would set the foundation for modern Spain. And let's be real, compared to their contemporaries, they were practically the definition of a power couple, not just with crowns, but with vision. This wasn't some medieval fairy tale where love conquers all. No, this was a calculated alliance with its fair share of bickering over who got the comfiest throne. You see, both Isabella and Ferdinand were fiercely independent and ambitious, and neither was willing to take the back seat. Their marriage contract stipulated they would rule jointly, a concept that was practically revolutionary at the time. It was like co-CEOs of a multi-billion-dollar company, where both had veto power and shared responsibilities. But unlike today's corporate disputes, they didn't have an HR department to mediate their disagreements. Now, why was this union such a big deal? Well, for starters, it effectively ended decades of infighting and fragmentation that had plagued the Iberian Peninsula. Before their marriage, Castile and Aragon were like two squabbling neighbors who couldn't agree on where one lawn ended and the other began. With Isabella and Ferdinand at the helm, the peninsular politics took a sharp turn towards unity. This was a time when Europe was more of a patchwork quilt of bickering states than the neatly stitched continent we see today. So their ability to unify such a large swath of territory was nothing short of a political masterclass. But let's not gloss over the fact that their political relationship was as complex as any modern-day power struggle. Imagine a chess game where both players are equally matched and neither is willing to play pawn. They had to navigate the murky waters of joint rule, which was as unprecedented then as it is now. Each had their own council of advisors, their own court, and their own agendas. Yet they managed to project a united front, at least to the outside world. And in doing so, they became the architects of a unified Spain. The secret source to their success, a shared vision for their kingdoms that went beyond mere territorial expansion. They were both deeply committed to strengthening the Catholic faith in their realms, which was not just a spiritual endeavor, but a political one as well. The unity of religion underpinned their political strategy and helped consolidate their power. In 1478, they established the Spanish Inquisition, not exactly a highlight in the history of religious tolerance, but a testament to their determination to create a cohesive national identity. Economically, they were no slouches either. Think of them as early venture capitalists who understood that money was the lifeblood of any successful reign. They reformed the tax system to increase revenue, which was crucial for funding their military campaigns and various state projects. This financial savvy not only stabilized their kingdoms, but also set the stage for Spain's future as a global powerhouse. In essence, they were the dynamic duo who could balance the books while plotting the next conquest. Speaking of conquests, let's not forget the Reconquista, that centuries-long effort to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule. Isabella and Ferdinand were the final act in this epic saga, capturing the last Muslim stronghold in Granada in 1492. It wasn't just a military victory, it was a symbol of their authority and the unification of Spain under Christian rule. This victory was celebrated across Europe and cemented their reputation as defenders of the faith. However, it also marked the beginning of a more intolerant era, with the expulsion of Jews and Muslims who refused to convert. Their domestic policies were no less ambitious. They worked tirelessly to curb the power of the nobility, who had grown accustomed to doing as they pleased during previous reigns. Through a series of reforms, they centralized authority under the crown, effectively reducing the clout of the powerful noble families. This wasn't just an exercise in power consolidation. It was a necessary step to ensure that the newly unified Spain wouldn't fracture under internal pressures. But let's not pretend it was all smooth sailing. The couple's political alliance was occasionally rocked by internal disputes and external threats. Ferdinand, ever the opportunist, occasionally pursued his own interests, particularly in Italy, which sometimes left Isabella dealing with the fallout back home. Their relationship was a constant negotiation, a delicate balance of power that required both to compromise more often than not. And yet, for all their differences, they shared a mutual respect and understanding that allowed them to work towards common goals. They had a knack for sensing when to yield and when to stand firm, a skill that kept their partnership strong through turbulent times. It's tempting to romanticize their relationship, but in reality, it was a testament to their political acumen and shared ambition more than anything else. So, what can we learn from this tale of two rulers who turned a marriage contract into a blueprint for a nation? That sometimes, the most successful partnerships are built not on love alone, but on a shared vision and the willingness to navigate the rocky terrain of power together. Isabella and Ferdinand's union was a cornerstone in the foundation of modern Spain, a testament to the fact that with the right alliance, even the most disparate kingdoms can become a united force. As we continue our journey through the annals of their reign, we'll uncover more about how they managed to juggle personal ambitions with the demands of statecraft. From dealing with rebellious nobles to financing voyages across uncharted seas, Isabella and Ferdinand's legacy is a masterclass in the art of rule. Stay tuned, because the adventure is far from over. As we delve deeper into Isabella's reign, it's impossible to ignore the shadow cast by the Spanish Inquisition, a period as infamous as it is misunderstood. The Inquisition is often portrayed as a time of unmitigated terror, with Isabella and Ferdinand painted as religious zealots wielding the cross like a cudgel. But as with most historical events, the truth is far more complex, and dare I say, stranger than fiction. First, a stroll down the cobblestones of Context Lane. By the late 15th century, Spain was a patchwork of religions. Christians, Muslims, and Jews had coexisted for centuries, albeit not always peacefully. This wasn't just a Cumbaya moment of multicultural harmony. It was a fragile balancing act that required constant negotiation. Enter Isabella, whose religious fervor was as genuine as it was politically expedient. To her, the unity of Spain was inextricably linked to religious homogeneity, and thus, the Inquisition was born in 1478, not as a medieval horror show, but as a tool for consolidating power. Now, I know what you're thinking. How does a queen justify turning her kingdom into a scene from a Gothic horror novel? Well, for Isabella, it was about creating a unified national identity. The Inquisition was intended to root out heretics, those who'd converted to Christianity, but were suspected of secretly practicing their old faiths. These conversos and moriscos were seen as a fifth column within the state, a potential threat to the fragile unity she and Ferdinand had painstakingly built. Let's sprinkle some numbers on this dark tale. By 1492, the same year Columbus was sailing the ocean blue, Isabella had ordered the expulsion of approximately 200,000 Jews who refused to convert. Yep, that's not a typo. The decision wasn't just about religious purity. It also had economic motivations. Jews were often seen as financial competitors, and their expulsion conveniently transferred wealth and property to the crown and loyal subjects. It's a grim reminder that religion and economics have always been uncomfortable bedfellows. But oh, the irony. For all the talk of religious purity, the Inquisition itself was more bureaucratic than biblical. The infamous Tomás de Torquemada, the first Grand Inquisitor, ran the operation with the efficiency of a medieval IRS. His methods were as methodical as they were merciless, with an estimated 2,000 executions during his tenure. And let's not forget the autos da fe, the public spectacles of penance and punishment that became their own kind of macabre theater. In today's terms, it was less about saving souls and more about crowd control with a side of spectacle. The myths surrounding the Inquisition often overshadow the mundane reality. It was as much about control as it was about conviction. The Church provided the moral authority, while the monarchy reaped the political benefits. And while Isabella's religious zeal is undeniable, it's crucial to recognize her pragmatism. She wasn't just a zealot. She was a ruler who understood the power of religion as a unifying force. In an age where the line between faith and politics was blurrier than a poorly drawn map, she knew how to wield both. But let's not sugarcoat it. The human cost was staggering. The Inquisition left deep scars on Spain's social fabric, driving out some of its most educated and economically active citizens. It was a self-inflicted wound that would haunt the country for generations. Yet, in the twisted logic of power, Isabella's actions were seen as necessary by many of her contemporaries, a testament to the dangerous allure of a singular vision. So, what's the takeaway from this chilling chapter of Isabella's reign? That history is rarely black and white, more often a murky shade of gray. The Spanish Inquisition was both a product of its time and a harbinger of future persecutions. It reminds us that the road to hell is indeed paved with good intentions, or at least intentions that seemed good to those wielding the shovel. As we navigate the labyrinth of Isabella's legacy, remember that she was a queen who played the game of thrones with the skill of a seasoned chess master. Her moves were calculated, her strategies layered, and her impact, for better or worse, undeniable. The chapter on the Inquisition is not the end of her story, but a pivotal moment that shaped the destiny of a nation. And as we continue to unravel her complex tapestry, we'll explore how her policies extended beyond the borders of Spain, casting ripples across the globe. The adventure is far from over, and the plot, as they say, thickens. As we continue to navigate the labyrinth of Isabella's legacy, we're about to embark on a journey that literally changed the map of the world. Enter Christopher Columbus, the Genos navigator with a penchant for grand dreams and a stubborn belief that he could reach the East by sailing west. Now, convincing the powers that be to fund a voyage based on a hunch was no small feat. But if there's anything we've learned about Isabella, it's that she had a knack for spotting an opportunity, even if it involved a fair amount of risk and a sprinkle of wishful thinking. Picture this. The late 15th century was a time when the world was both vast and mysterious, with large swaths of the globe still uncharted and unknown. Portugal had already cornered the market on the eastern sea route to India, thanks to Vasco da Gama's voyages around Africa's Cape of Good Hope. Spain, eager not to be left out of this lucrative spice trade, needed a bold move. Columbus's proposal to reach Asia by sailing west across the Atlantic was like pitching a startup in Silicon Valley. High risk, high reward, and more than a little speculative. Now, let's talk logistics. Financing such a voyage was akin to funding a modern space mission, but with even less certainty about what lay beyond the horizon. Columbus initially approached the Portuguese and English crowns, but they were as enthusiastic as a cat at a dog show. Undeterred, Columbus turned to Spain, where Isabella and Ferdinand were weighing their options. The promise of untold wealth from the Indies must have sounded like music to their ears, especially since their recent military campaigns had left the royal coffers echoing like an empty cave. The final deal, sealed in the famed capitulations of Santa Fe in April 1492, was a curious mix of faith and financial wizardry. Columbus was granted the titles of Admiral of the Ocean Sea and Viceroy of any lands he might discover, along with a cut of the profits, 10% to be exact. It was a staggering offer, considering he hadn't even set sail yet. And here's where the numbers come in. The crown provided roughly 14 million maravedis, a currency that sounds more like a tasty tapas dish than serious cash. Today, that will be the equivalent of around 50, 000 to 100, 000 euros, a paltry sum for a venture of such scale. Talk about a shoestring budget. With the financial backing secured, Columbus set sail on August 3, 1492 with 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, and a crew of about 90 men. The journey was fraught with danger and uncertainty, a true leap into the unknown. The Atlantic Ocean was an unforgiving expanse, and the prospect of running out of supplies was all too real. Nevertheless, on October 12, 1492, after more than 2 months at sea, land was sighted. Columbus believed he had reached the outskirts of Asia, when in fact he had stumbled upon the Bahamian archipelago. Here's where the amusing miscommunications begin. Columbus, convinced he had found a shortcut to the riches of the East, referred to the indigenous people he encountered as Indians, a geographical blunder that would persist for centuries. The reality was, of course, quite different. Instead of the spices and silks of Asia, Columbus found tobacco, new crops like maize, and gold in far smaller quantities than he had hoped. But who's counting? The real gold mine, as it turns out, was the land itself, an entire new world ripe for exploration and exploitation. Back in Spain, Columbus returned a hero. His voyages were initially hailed as a monumental success, and he was showered with honors and titles. But beneath the veneer of triumph lay a more complicated truth. The lands Columbus discovered were not empty or waiting to be claimed. They were home to diverse civilizations with their own rich histories and cultures. The European arrival heralded an era of conquest and colonization, bringing with it disease, displacement, and devastation for the indigenous populations. Let's not sugarcoat it. The human cost of these voyages was enormous. The introduction of old-world diseases like smallpox wreaked havoc on native communities, who had no immunity to these new illnesses. Some estimates suggest that up to 90% of the indigenous population in certain areas were wiped out in the decades following European contact. It's a grim reminder that exploration often comes with a price, one that is paid in human lives. Columbus's voyages also sparked a frenzy of exploration and competition among European powers. Spain, now convinced of the potential wealth of the New World, began to pour resources into further expeditions. The Treaty of Tordesillas, signed in 1494 between Spain and Portugal, divided the newly discovered lands outside Europe between the two countries along a meridian 370 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands. This agreement was meant to prevent conflict, but in practice, it was like drawing lines on a map with a crayon and hoping no one would color outside them. Economically, the influx of new resources from the Americas had a profound impact on Spain and Europe as a whole. The gold and silver extracted from the New World fueled a period of unprecedented growth and wealth accumulation in Europe. However, it also contributed to inflation and economic imbalances that would have long-term consequences. In the short term, though, it was a boon for the Spanish crown, providing much-needed funds to support ongoing military campaigns and state projects. But let's not pretend it was all smooth sailing from here on out. Columbus's subsequent voyages were fraught with difficulties and diminishing returns. By the time of his third voyage, the initial excitement had waned, and Columbus found himself embroiled in controversies over his governance of the new territories. Accusations of mismanagement and brutality toward the indigenous populations led to his arrest and return to Spain in chains in 1500. Talk about a fall from grace. So, what do we learn from this chapter of Isabella's reign? That exploration is a double-edged sword, offering the allure of discovery and wealth, but also the harsh reality of conquest and exploitation. Columbus's voyages were a turning point in history, opening the door to a new world of possibilities and consequences. And while Isabella's support for Columbus was undoubtedly a gamble, it was one that reshaped the world in ways that are still felt today. As we continue our exploration of Isabella's legacy, we'll delve deeper into the repercussions of these voyages and the impact they had on both the Old and New Worlds. The story is far from over, and the next chapter promises more twists, turns, and revelations. Stay tuned, because the adventure is just getting started. So, as we sail away from the high seas of Columbus's voyages, let's dock our ship at the port of Isabella's legacy, an island of contrasts if there ever was one. Isabella I of Castile, a name that echoes through the annals of history like a bell tolling both triumph and tragedy. Her reign was a tapestry woven with threads of power, piety, and paradox. On one hand, she's lauded as a unifying force, the queen who crafted a nation from the fragments of medieval Spain. On the other, she's remembered for policies that cast long, often harsh shadows, both at home and across the Atlantic. First up, let's talk empire building. Isabella's reign marked the dawn of the Spanish Empire, an era when the sun truly never set on Spanish soil, or so they liked to claim. By bankrolling Columbus, Isabella cracked open a world of possibilities, literally. The New World wasn't just a land of opportunity, it was a treasure chest waiting to be plundered. Gold and silver flowed into Spain like a river of liquid sunlight, an economic jackpot that propelled Spain to the forefront of European powers. At its peak, Spain controlled territory spanning Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia, a sprawling empire that would make any modern multinational corporation blush with envy. But let's not skip over the dirty laundry. The riches of the Americas came at a steep price for the indigenous peoples. The encomienda system, essentially a polite term for forced labor, turned native populations into cogs in the imperial machine. And while Spanish coffers swelled, the societal fabric of the Americas unraveled. Diseases like smallpox spread faster than gossip at a royal court, decimating entire communities. It's a grim reminder that the glittering allure of empire often masks a foundation built on suffering. Economically, the influx of silver from the New World had profound effects on Europe. Spain saw its wealth balloon, but like a lottery winner without a financial advisor, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Inflation reared its ugly head, with prices rising faster than a court jester's hat after a good punchline. This price revolution rippled across Europe, altering economies and societies. While Spain initially basked in its newfound wealth, it struggled to maintain its dominance, as the costs of sustaining such a vast empire became an albatross around its neck. Let's pivot to another cornerstone of Isabella's legacy: religious uniformity. The Spanish Inquisition and the expulsion of Jews and Muslims weren't just footnotes in her reign, they were defining chapters. Isabella's vision of a unified Spain was as much about religious conformity as it was about political cohesion. The Alhambra Decree of 1492, which expelled Jews who refused to convert, was a seismic event. It sent shockwaves through Spanish society, displacing thousands and depriving Spain of communities that had been integral to its cultural and economic life. The loss of these skilled artisans, financiers, and intellectuals was a self-inflicted wound that Spain would feel for generations. But why did Isabella, a ruler known for her pragmatism, take such drastic measures? It wasn't just about religious zeal. In a world where faith and politics were as intertwined as vines on a trellis, religious uniformity was seen as essential for political stability. The fear of internal dissent was real, and Isabella's policies were aimed at creating a cohesive national identity. Yet the irony is hard to miss. In seeking to unify, she also divided, leaving a legacy of intolerance that would haunt Spain for centuries. Now, how does history remember Isabella? Well, that's a question with no easy answer. On one hand, she's celebrated as a powerful queen, a patron of exploration who helped lay the foundations for the modern world. Her reign is often romanticized, depicted as an era of chivalry and courtly splendor. But strip away the gilded veneer, and a more complex picture emerges. Her policies, while visionary in their scope, were often ruthless in execution. The Spanish Inquisition, for all its bureaucratic efficiency, remains a dark stain on her legacy, a testament to the dangers of wielding power without compassion. Isabella's story is a reminder that history is rarely a simple tale of heroes and villains. It's a complex narrative where light and shadow coexist, where ambition can lead to both greatness and tragedy. Her reign was a balancing act on the tightrope of power, a testament to her skill as a ruler, but also a cautionary tale of the costs of empire and uniformity. As we close the book on Isabella's legacy, we're left with a portrait of a queen who was as formidable as she was flawed, a ruler whose impact resounds through the corridors of time. In the end, Isabella's legacy is like a mosaic, a collection of pieces that form a picture that is both beautiful and unsettling. Her story is a testament to the power of ambition, the complexity of leadership, and the enduring human struggle to reconcile ideals with reality. As we put this chapter to rest, Let's remember that history is not just about the past. It's a mirror that reflects our own world, challenging us to learn from its lessons and chart a course for the future. And with that, we set sail once more, navigating the seas of history with a map that Isabella herself helped to draw.